The Sasanians. The Achaemenid Empire established Persian supremacy in the known world from the 6th to the 4th centuries BCE. This reality often eludes us, as we in the West have been so enamored with Greece and its neighboring islands throughout antiquity. The Persian hegemony facilitated the unity of the three principal river civilizations: Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India. This encounter merged diverse religious, technological, and political concepts, ushering the world into a new epoch under Persian dominion. The devotees of Humban, the revered Elamite god, acquired knowledge of Ahura Mazda, the principal Zoroastrian deity, while the followers of Ahura Mazda learned of Marduk, a significant figure among the Mesopotamian gods. As ethical monotheists, the Hebrews engaged with the Zoroastrians, resulting in a significant interaction period that influenced both groups' ideas. This meeting undoubtedly occurred in a climate of tolerance seldom witnessed in history, serving as a lesson for the Greco-Macedonian armies and the era known as the Hellenistic Age. In the 4th century BCE, Alexander subjugated the satrapies of the Persian Empire. In this Greco-Macedonian endeavor, Alexander is perceived not merely as a foreign conqueror, but as an individual who sought to legitimize his victory by asserting his status as the legitimate heir to the Persian throne. During his conquests in Persia, he adopted Persian customs, engaged in magi ceremonies, and married Persian princesses to symbolically perpetuate the regal Achaemenid lineage as per P. From Bryant's viewpoint, Alexander was the last sovereign of the Achaemenid dynasty in Persia. The Greco-Macedonians had integrated into an established world system of which they had assumed control. Alexander did not survive to witness the outcomes of his conquests and perished in Babylonia, leaving his generals contending for the treasures. One of his generals, Seleucus, 312 to 308 BCE, founded the Seleucid dynasty in Persia. This dynasty exerted only nominal rule over the Iranian plateau, and by 250 BCE, indications of weakness and division were already apparent. During this period, Greco-Macedonian colonies were formed on the Iranian plateau. Nevertheless, these conquerors were rapidly assimilated into Persian culture, with only a few remaining in garrisons. It's not clear how the local people felt about these political events, but Zoroastrian literature suggests that Alexander and his diverse group of conquerors were seen as evil, coming from the lineage of the demon of wrath who destroyed the earth, killed the Magi, and ended the faith that worshipped Mazda. Only then did Alexander flee to the dark, odorous realm known to the Zoroastrians as the House of Worst Existence, or Hell. By 238 BCE, the Arsacids had overrun the eastern Iranian plateau, leading to a new dynasty that acknowledged the Persian and Greco-Macedonian heritage. The Arsacids increasingly aligned themselves with Persian culture, embracing the concepts and values of the ancient Persian monarchs. We don't know much about the province of Persis, Fars, which was the center of the Persians. However, they were somewhat independent and maintained many ancestral traditions. The local rulers governed the region, as seen by their currency, reflecting a reverence for history. Subsequent local rulers, the kings of Persis, issued coins bearing their own names. At the onset of the 3rd century CE, an enigmatic initiative emerged from a local Persian family named Sasan to extend their influence beyond Istakhar. A favored son of Persis named Ardashir, evoking the Achaemenid royal name Artaxerxes, and the more contemporary Persis king Ardashir Ardashir, altered the trajectory of history once more. Ardashir I and the foundation of the Sasanian Empire. In 224 CE, Ardashir I vanquished Ardawan, Artabanus IV, at the plain of Hormozgan and founded the Sasanian Empire. Subsequently, Ardashir adopted the title King of Kings and commenced the conquest of a region known as Iran Shar. Before the decisive confrontation between the final Arsacid monarch and the founder of the Sasanian dynasty, numerous internal and external events facilitated the ascendance of this new dynasty. In the West, the Roman Empire was experiencing one of its most tumultuous periods, a precarious era marked by uncertainty regarding its future. Roman legions devoted to their commanders instigated turmoil within the empire as successive barbarian rulers ruled for short durations. During Caracalla's reign, religious zealots governed the empire, instigating civil unrest. Ardawan IV triumphed over Caracalla and the Romans near Nisibis in 217 CE. A contract in 218 CE established a financial settlement and retained the majority of Mesopotamia under Arsacid control. The subsequent emperors, Elagabalus, 218-22 CE, and Alexander Severus, 222-235 CE, encountered internal challenges that hindered them from prioritizing the Arsacids and the Sasanians. Although Ardawan successfully repelled the Romans, he faced internal challenges from Balash, Vologases VI, who produced coins bearing his own name until 221-222 CE, indicating that the question of a supreme king of kings remained unresolved inside the Arsacid Empire. Unsurprisingly, a local warrior and his family in the province of Persis could ascend and commence the conquest of adjacent territories in a short period. Ardawan faced more significant issues and could not focus on a trivial challenger in Persis. The Sasanian effort to dominate the province of Persis commenced in 205-206 CE, when Ardashir I's father, Pabag, deposed the local monarch of Istakhar, Gozir, from the Bazrangid lineage. Sources indicate that Pabag was a priest in Anahit's fire temple in Istakhar, perhaps a focal point for local Persian warriors devoted to this deity. Anahit holds significance as an object of veneration in the Zoroastrian sacred scripture. The Avesta refer to Yashte-T5, or the Aban Yasht, by heroes, warriors, and monarchs. In the early 5th century BCE, during the Achaemenid era, Artaxerxes II venerated Anahid, Anahita, alongside Mihir, Mithra, and Ormazd, Ahura Mazda. Consequently, the Anahita cult of Persis must be ancient, and the temple may have sustained Persian tradition. Anahita's readiness to combat stemmed from ancient Near Eastern, Ishtar, Hellenic, Athena Anitis, and Iranian traditions. This conferred legitimacy upon the Sasanian monarchs. Pabag designated his eldest son, Shabur, as his successor, as evidenced by coins depicting both Shabur and his father. Nonetheless, Shabur perished under enigmatic circumstances. The obverse of these coins features the inscription by MLK, His Majesty, King Shabur, while the reverse displays BRH, by the son of His Majesty, King Pabag. Although confirmation is challenging, it seems that Ardashir and his adherents benefited significantly from this accidental death. One can conclude whether the Persepolis graffiti accurately depicts Pabag and his son Shabur. The Sasanians were evolving into a dynasty that wielded secular and religious authority in Persis. Secondly, before Ardashir's ascension, the fire cult, intrinsically linked to Zoroastrianism, was already there. Third, the fact that the writings of Pabag and Shabur are close to the Achaemenid buildings shows that the Sasanians thought these sites were important. Following Shabur's demise, it is plausible to conclude that Ardashir succeeded him as the successor and commenced the further conquest of Persis and its surroundings. Ardawan IV had grown apprehensive at this juncture. Although neither the reinforcements dispatched nor the troops under his direct command could vanquish Ardashir, Walachash Balash, the Parthian rival of Ardawan IV in Mesopotamia, survived the Parthian monarch, but ultimately became the subsequent casualty of Ardashir in 229 CE. At this point, most of the Iranian plateau and the Arabian side of the Persian Gulf had integrated into his dominion. During his incursion into Armenia, Syria, and Cappadocia, Ardashir engaged in hostilities with Rome and Emperor Alexander Severus 222-235 CE 14. Alexander Severus communicated to Ardashir that his invasion of the Roman Empire would be unsuccessful compared to his gains in neighboring territories. During Severus's lifetime, neither Ardashir nor the Romans could achieve victory over each other. Wars of 231-233 CE. However, following Severus's death in 235 CE, the Sasanians invaded Mesopotamia, Dura, Karhai, Nisbis, and ultimately Hatra. Ardashir subsequently withdrew and spent his remaining years in Persis, while his son, Shabuhar I, who had participated in the 240 CE campaign, persisted in his conquests and the empire's expansion. One may inquire why Ardashir undertook these operations against the Romans. This was likely due to the stable borders between the Roman and Parthian empires, which had previously included Osroene, Hatra, and Armenia. Nonetheless, Severus's conquest of Osroene jeopardized the heartland of the Arsacid and, subsequently, the Sasanian dynasty. Further elaboration on Ardashir is warranted, as he is a significant figure in the evolution of the Sasanian perspective and imperial ideology. The material remnants of his reign are particularly abundant in elucidating his worldview. He commissioned many rock reliefs at Firuzabad, Nakshi-Rajab, and Nakshi-Rustam to celebrate his triumph. At Nakshi-Rustam, he ascends his steed and looms over the deceased form of Ardawan. Ormazd confronts him on horseback, standing over the corpse of the malevolent spirit Ahriman and presenting the emblem of sovereignty to Ardashir I. This relief shows that Ardashir thought or tried to convince others that he was divinely appointed to rule over Iran Sahar, the realm of the Iranians, Aryans, and the people who lived there were called Iranians. The Avesta recognized this territory as the legendary homeland of the Aryans. The Sasanian Empire now delineates this territory. Both Zoroastrians and non-Zoroastrians throughout the empire accepted this idea. It has stayed in the minds of Persians through many eras and social classes of Iranian society and government up to the present day. It is important to distinguish this concept from the classical historians' accounts, which suggest that Ardashir aimed to recapture the Achaemenid Persian territory. A conception of Iran Shah existed within the religious domain, potentially leading to political ideas of a defined territory. This information is derived from the 3rd century inscriptions of the Zoroastrian priest Kirdir, which delineate what was regarded as Iran Shah and what was classified as an Iran or non-Iranian territory. Kirdir states that he founded numerous fires and priests in Iran Shah, namely in the provinces of Persis, Parthia, Babylonia, Messene, Adiabene, Azerbaijan, Isfahan, Ray, Kerman, Sistan, and Gurgan, extending to Peshawar. Kirdir indicates that Syria, Cilicia, Armenia, Georgia, Albania, and Balazgan, under Sasanian dominion, were classified as an Eran. The term also serves as an adjectival form, signifying Iranianness. We appropriated the ancient Greek notion of barbarous along with its cultural connotations. This legend indicates that Ardashir regarded himself primarily as a devotee of Mazda, Ormazd, Mazdism. Additionally, he perceived himself as having divine lineage. This raises the inquiry regarding his perceived ancestry. Which deities were his ancestors? The namesake of the dynasty, Sasan, is significant to this inquiry. People used to think that the writing form SSN found on some Parthian ostraca and other documents meant Sasan was a Zoroastrian god, even though he isn't mentioned in the Avesta or Old Persian texts. Recently, Martin Schwartz proposed that the deity referenced on the ostraca is unrelated to Sasan and instead represents Sesen, an ancient Semitic god documented in Ugaritic as early as the 2nd millennium BCE. Additionally, coins bearing the name Sasa were discovered in Taxila from the 1st century CE, potentially linked to Sasan due to the emblem's resemblance to Shabuhurthastrur's coat of arms. The Persian epic, the Shahnameh by Ferdowsi, references an Eastern origin for Sasan, suggesting that this lineage may have originated from the East. Even though it's difficult to say, Ardashir may have considered himself a descendant of the gods, Yazda N, and the Sasanians may have believed in Sasan as a god. This concept may have sprung from Iran's Hellenic heritage. The Seleucids and Alexander the Great considered themselves descendants of Theos, or God, and Epiphanes, or God-made manifests, as illustrated in early Sasanian art. The resemblance between the images of Ormezd and Ardashir of Hafiz in Naqsh-i Rustam and other early rock reliefs could potentially reinforce this idea. Here and I share similarities in Naqsh-i Rustam and other early rock reliefs. Shabur-I and the conflict with Rome. In 240 CE, Shabuha-Uwa, the son of Ardashir, assumed the role of co-regent. Ardashir presumably commissioned this currency, featuring both men, to guarantee a secure succession. His other sons, appointed governors of several regions, might have aspired to the throne, just as he had in his youth. This system is emblematic of the Sasanians, wherein sons were dispatched to govern various regions. And upon the ruler's demise, one of the heirs would ascend to the throne. The Sasanians were susceptible to the peril of dynastic conflict. The prior king's selection initially determined the succession procedure, but subsequently the nobility and Zoroastrian priests took over the decision-making process. Shabur-Forvin joined his father in combat, which prepared him for warfare and guaranteed his triumph against Rome. In 243 CE, Gordian invaded Mesopotamia to recover the territories taken by Ardashir and his son following the death of Alexander Severus. Shabur informs us, per Eshkezi, that he succeeded in killing him at Misiki in 244 CE, near the Euphrates River, which he subsequently named Peroz Shabur, victorious Shabur. We now recognize Gordian's death in Zaitha, northern Mesopotamia, in 244 CE, when the conflict between the opposing factions appeared improbable. Some theorized that the Roman troops assassinated Gordian during their retreat at Zaitha after their defeat. According to a Shabur inscription, Gordian arrived with a contingent of Goths and Germans. They suffered defeat in a rapid confrontation. As a result, Philip the Arab was compelled to sign a treaty that relinquished significant land and a substantial sum of gold as war reparations, totaling 500,000 denarii. The territories acquired by the Sasanians from the Romans included significant portions of Mesopotamia and Armenia. It is important to recognize that the nascent Sasanian dynasty also contended with a faction of the Arsacid family in Armenia, necessitating the elimination of any resistance to secure its northern flank while engaging the Romans. Consequently, the formidable kingdom of Armenia experienced a tumultuous history during the Sasanian era. Shabur-Rafai celebrated his triumph in a rock relief at Naqsh-i Rustam, illustrating his domination over the two Roman emperors. He also provided an extensive account of his actions at Kabeye Zardosht in Persis, the Sasanians' inaugural lengthy testament, illustrating their perspective through an epic story. In his Res Gestai, he details his religious beliefs, ancestry, the territories he governed, and the destiny of the Romans. Shabur-Rashi indicates that Caesar, Gordian, deceived, framing the situation within a Zoroastrian theological setting where the Romans symbolized lie, disorder, in contrast to the Persians who embodied truth, order. In 252 CE, Shabur commenced his second campaign against a Roman contingent of 60,000 at Barbalissus. The Romans experienced total defeat, and, as per the KZ account, they seized around 37 towns in Mesopotamia and Syria. The rationale for this campaign is succinctly articulated, and Caesar again deceives and wrongs Armenia. What was this falsehood? Despite Philip's assurance to grant the Iranians dominion over Armenia, he did not relinquish it to the Sasanians. Philip consented alone to revert to the ancient pact established during the era of Augustus and the Arsacids, wherein the Roman emperor appointed the Armenian sovereign selected by the Arsacid king of kings. The Arsacid dynasty of Armenia and the Sasanians, who witnessed the Romans anointing their northern adversary, would undoubtedly have contested such a practice. In 260 CE, Shabutham commenced his third expedition, capturing eastern Mesopotamia, Syria, and the eastern Mediterranean coastline. This conflict resulted in the capture and exile of Emperor Valerian, senators, and soldiers to Sasanian land. The Sasanian Empire thereafter included Goths, Romans, Slavs, and various populations from the Near East. Before this, no individual could assert the ability to assassinate a Roman emperor, render one a tributary, and seize and incarcerate a third. Shabur was acutely conscious of his achievement and did not hesitate to proclaim his valor in his inscription. At a rock relief in Persis, Valerian is depicted kneeling before him, and in the ruins of Bishabur, a site is designated as Zendan-e Valerian, meaning Valerian's prison. This triumph of Shabur, they did not escape the scrutiny of Roman accounts, although the rationale for Valerian's defeat, as articulated by many Christians, was his paganism and persecution of Christians. In contrast, others provided a more measured perspective on the captured emperor. Despite the fluctuating borders between Rome and Persia along the Tigris and Euphrates, movement was not impeded, contingent upon military successes. Individuals from both factions went between regions, participated in commerce, and engaged in intermarriage. Spies were useful because they could easily and quickly cross the border. Both sides viewed providing information about the enemy as a major act of betrayal. Currently, the Persians rule Mesopotamia, but they have to confront the situation in Armenia, which has rebelled against Ardashir and defeated his army. Armenia served as the connection between the Sasanian and Roman empires until the conclusion of the Sasanian Empire. For strategic and economic reasons, the Armenian situation was intricate and significant for all parties, as Armenia functioned as a buffer between Persia and Rome. Given that a faction of the Parthian royal lineage persisted in Armenia, it is plausible to understand Shabur's desire to resolve Armenia's issues. He orchestrated the killing of monarch Zosrov and appointed a loyal monarch named Tiridates, who reigned from 252 to 262 CE. The significance of Armenia to the Persians is clearly evident, exemplified by multiple heirs to the Sasanian throne, who were assigned to Armenia and referred to as the Great King of Armenia. No other province within the Sasanian Empire held such a prestigious title. Shabur, One, and Mani. Bur's Christian perspective became prominent throughout his tenure. Kurdir was in the process of establishing the Zoroastrian Church by formulating a legal framework, canonizing the Avesta, creating a unified philosophy, consolidating the belief system, and instituting a Zoroastrian religious hierarchy linked to the state. Concurrently, Mani arose from Mesopotamia, advocating a universally recognized religion. According to Manichaean texts, during the final years of Ardashir, Mani traversed the empire and traveled to India. During the reign of Shabur I, he returned to the Sasanian Empire, presented himself before the monarch, received honors, resided with him for a period, and was granted permission to preach across the empire. It is incorrect to view Zoroastrianism as an exclusive faith today, given that it was a religion that subjugated populations could embrace. Shabuhar's acceptance of Mani and dedication to Ormazd and Zoroastrianism has posed challenges for historians. However, if Shabur had observed the increasing influence and organization of the Zoroastrian priesthood, would he not have endeavored to demonstrate that the King of Kings retained ultimate authority? Having received training in the rituals and ceremonies of the Anahid fire temple, did the Sasanians not act as its guardians and priests? The Sasanian preoccupation with politics should not have undermined their religious authority, at least until the reign of Wahram I. Mani successfully disseminated his religion during the tenure of Shabur I and his successor. Shabur I notes in his Res Gestae that several Wahram fires were erected, and that lamb, wine, and bread were presented to the gods for the souls of the kings and queens of the Sasanian dynasty. A Zoroastrian priest would have deemed all of them as pagan, including the cult of the king, Sasanian court, and administration. Examine the retinue, bureaucracy, and court size of Ardashir Farn, compared to Shabur I. The administrative structure and court size expanded. It is logical, as an empire required more than merely a monarch. The administration required governors, viceroys, a steward, a commander of the royal guard, scribes, treasurers, judges, and a market inspector, in addition to local kings, princes of royal lineage, grandees, minor nobility, and other officials, as documented in the Rang Gestae. The nobility, whose allegiance to their clan was paramount, subsequently pledged fealty to the Sasanians. Prominent families such as Waraz, Surin, Andigan, and Karen were bestowed various honors and positions, including Master of Ceremonies and Crown Bestower. The rock reliefs of Nakshi Rajab and Nakshi Rustam distinctly exhibit their clan insignias, heraldic symbols, and headgear. We are unaware of the association between each clan symbol and its respective clan and its significance, whether it served as an insignia or represented clan names. Geship, Wahrams, and Narseh. Home is down 271 CE. Perhaps the youngest progeny of Shabur the Ferns, ascended to the throne and reigned briefly, yet he is renowned for his exceptional governance and the establishment of the city of Ram-Hormizd in Khuzistan. Tabara indicates that Hormizd was designated the king of Khurasan and selected as the heir because of his valor and fidelity to Shabur. He may have demonstrated military aptitude, like his father during Shabur's war in the 260s, which justified the monarch's designation of him as heir. The Shabur Kabeya Zardosht inscription preferred him over his elder brother Narseh, referring to him as the king of Sistan. What Hormizd I was thinking when he let Mani teach his lessons in public and gave Kerdir more levels and titles while letting him keep working on his projects is still mysterious. This may have been an element of Hormizd's twofold containment strategy, as he exerted control over both religions to assert dominance in the region. Wahram I, 271-274 CE, had a brief reign, although we know more about him and his notable career. Hormizd circumvented Wahram I, the eldest son of Shabuhur, who his father had designated as the monarch of Gilan. Initially, Kerdir seems to have supported his succession, benefiting both the Zoroastrian priesthood and Kerdir by ascending to the throne. In 274 CE, Mani traveled from the east to meet Wahram, and there exists a Manichaean book detailing the severe treatment of the prophet. Wahram reprimanded him for his incompetence as a physician and his lack of utility, leading him to order his arrest and incarceration. Wahram II took the throne in 274 CE and may have been required. Kurdir's aid in evading Narse, the newly appointed great king of Armenia, signified the commencement of his genuine rise to power. Kurdir initiated the persecution of non-Zoroastrians within the empire, including Jews, Christians, Manichaeans, Mandeans, and Buddhists. During the reign of Wahram II, 274 to 293 CE, Kurdir attained elevated prestige and status, during which the Sasanian monarchs ceded significant religious authority over the Anahid fire temple to Kurdir, so designating him as the arbiter of the entire empire. This meant that from then on the priests were judges all over the empire, and Zoroastrian law was probably used to decide court cases, except when there were disagreements between people of different religions. These developments will be examined further in the chapter on religion. Wahram II is the inaugural sovereign to feature a familial portrait on his coinage. The Brahms, silver coins, feature him with his queen, Shabu Herduktag, his cousin, and his son, Wahram III. He also commissioned multiple rock reliefs as memorials featuring his family. Wahram II exhibited a notable preoccupation with preserving a portrait of his family, providing insights into the court and the Persian notion of bam. This encompassed wine consumption, banqueting, music, and games performed before the monarch and courtiers, as demonstrated by the rock reliefs and silver plates from the Sasanian period. Armenian sources from the Sasanian period accurately contextualize the term basm, meaning feast. The phrase basmok, signifying to recline in Armenian, denotes the banqueting couch utilized by the nobility and the king during court feasts. The courtiers reclined on cushions, bar, with the number of cushions indicating their significance in the court. Certain banqueting couches accommodated two individuals, text or gash, where one's nearness to the King of Kings signified their honor and intimacy with him. Individuals whose tax or gash was more distant from the king indicated a lower status, and any further relocation marked relegation and dishonor. These pictures may have legitimized Wahram II's ascension over Narse, who at this time must have been considerably discontented with being repeatedly overlooked, although he held the title of Great King of Armenia, a designation reserved for the heir apparent. Wahram II's poor circumstances became evident when his brother Hormizd led an insurrection in Sistan in 283 CE. The chronology of events remains ambiguous. Nonetheless, it is indicated that Hormizd had backing from the Sistanis, Gilanis, and the Kushans, Rufi, in his battle against Wahram II. Wahram II faced additional challenges, including the religious conflict in the province of Khuzestan, which was instigated by a particular Mao who maintained authority in the region for an extended period. Emperor Probus had formulated plans to invade Sasanian territory. Upon his death, Carus initiated the conflict and invaded Mesopotamia, besieging the capital, Ctesiphon, while Wahram II was in the east. Carus died in Mesopotamia in 283 CE. Diocletian, the subsequent emperor, confronted Rome's internal issues and established a treaty with Wahram II that delineated the Perso-Roman frontiers. Wahram II could now confront his brother, Hormizd, while Diocletian concentrated on implementing reforms within his empire, restoring order to a formerly tumultuous Roman domain. This treaty partitioned Armenia between the two nations, assigning Western Armenia to Tirdate, Tirdates IV, and granting Narseh dominion over Greater Armenia, subsequently referred to as Perse Armenia. Upon Bahram II's death in 293 CE, he had subdued his adversary Hormizd in the east, yet dynastic conflicts continued. Waham's son, Waham III, recognized as king of the Sakas, was elevated to the throne by a party, potentially supported by Kerdir, Adur Farabey, king of Meshan, and Wanaem, son of Tartus. Nevertheless, they would not disregard Narseh again. A contingent of nobles and loyal adherents welcomed him as he departed for Mesopotamia. Wahram III's fate is still unknown. However, they apprehended and executed Wa-Nazm, paving the way for Narseh to ascend to the throne as King of Kings. Narseh has once more favored us by providing his personal endorsement at Paikuli in northern Mesopotamia. It is a biography and a tale legitimizing his ascension to the throne, detailing that the aristocracy and courtiers urged him to assume the crown upon meeting. This inscription shares similarities with others in the Near East, including the Behistun inscription of Darius I and many pre-Achaemenid inscriptions, prompting some to consider it a less credible source. It has been asserted that the Paikuli inscription may lack substantial historical information regarding the type of epic literature created since antiquity in the ancient Near East. We cannot accept this assumption. Although it is acknowledged that the narrative is presented in an epic context, the number of ways a monarch could convey his story and campaign remains uncertain. Narrating a story or historical event in a particular format should not inherently diminish its importance. After all, monarchs waged wars, vanquished adversaries, and governed their realms. These difficulties constitute the genre that prompts a king to commission an inscription. The Behistun and Naqsh-i-Rustam inscriptions manifest a persistent characteristic of Persian civilization. The Paikuli inscription presents the concept that the adversaries of the legitimate king, Narseh, adherent of truth, order, were proponents of falsehood, demon, disorder. This binary opposition, characteristic of Sasanian Zoroastrianism, effectively served to vilify the king's foes. The rock relief of Narseh at Naqsh-i-Rustam is significant as it depicts him receiving the insignia of sovereignty from the divinity Anahid. 65. Excluding the theological connotations, does this indicate that politically Narseh managed to reclaim authority over the fire temple of Anahid in Istakir and was redirecting his allegiance to this deity at the expense of Kerdir's influence? It is plausible that devotion to Lady Anahid was never abandoned, yet the simple depiction of Narseh and Anahad may suggest a religio-political upheaval within the Sasanian Empire. This likely reaffirmed the legacy of Narseh's father and grandfather, Shabur I and Ardashir, as well as his own, as the original and rightful sovereigns who initiated their campaign surrounding the worship of this deity. Narseh was less effective in foreign affairs. He proclaimed war against Rome in 296 CE, due to Roman interference in Armenia. Although he initially withstood the Roman forces led by Galerius, the Sasanian army was ultimately vanquished in the second battle, resulting in the loss of his wife and family. In 298, he negotiated the Treaty of Nisibis when he relinquished portions of Mesopotamia in exchange for his family's return and peace, restored Armenia to Tirdate, and established that the king of Iberia would henceforth be selected by the Romans. The Roman presence in Iberia, Georgia, adversely affected Sasanian influence in the region, as the Georgian monarch and aristocracy embraced Christianity in 330 CE. Narseh's reign established a new power equilibrium between the Romans and the Persians. The omission of an Ezran from his titles on several coin inscriptions indicates a deficiency in imperial ambition. An overview of the 3rd century. In the 3rd century CE, the initial 2 sovereigns of Iran, Shah, founded and structured a Persian empire originating from the province of Persis. Persis is pivotal in the 3rd century, as it is the inaugural province referenced in all early Sasanian rock reliefs and the birthplace of the Sasan family. Later records show that, like Constantine, Ardashir the Roi tried to create a religious system in the 4th century that he and his ancestors would follow. Zoroastrianism, meaning maiden worship or Madonna worship, was the name of this system. The initial word on the coins and inscriptions of Ardashir and Shebur indicates their profound devotion and declaration for Mazd. Ardashir and his wise priest Tosar meticulously examined the spoken and written records preserved throughout the empire, particularly in Persis. They started the process of making the teachings that are now known as Zoroastrianism official. By the age of Shapur I, the Romans had acknowledged the emergence of a formidable power in the east capable of vanquishing any Roman army, assassinating its generals, and capturing its emperor. The inscription of Shapur I illustrates the expansion and increased sophistication of the Sasanian Empire's administrative structure. We can anticipate an ordered and dynamic empire. Shapur I, however, sought to employ Manichaeism, a faith that appears to have captivated numerous adherents from various places in Asia and the Mediterranean, as a substitute for Zoroastrianism. Although Zoroastrianism was the faith of his ancestors, Shapur I recognized the necessity of a universal religion to establish allegiance to the monarchy and the state. To govern the Iranians was one issue, but to reign over an era necessitated a more universal faith. The increasing presence of Zoroastrian priests, however, precluded this eventuality. Following Shapur's demise, under King Wahram I, Kurdir and his associates ensured that Mani was thwarted and subsequently met an untimely end, thereby preserving the Mazdian allegiance of the King of Kings and promoting the Zoroastrian faith throughout the empire at any cost. Kurdir is crucial for safeguarding the Zoroastrian heritage until its complete evolution under the Sasanians. Shapur, I may have begun to conceive that the notion of Iran's Shah is not solely associated with Zoroastrianism, despite its origins in that faith. Any individual, whether Marda citizen, Zana male citizen, or Shaha female citizen, could be designated as an Irani. We anticipated the emergence of this idea in a subsequent century, yet it was premature for it to take root in a new empire. The Zoroastrian priests integrated themselves into the imperial authority and increasingly engaged in society's daily operations. They diminished the ecclesiastical authority of the King of Kings, particularly following Shapur I's ungodly interference with Mani. For Zoroastrianism to endure, it required a structured hierarchy and a religious heritage centered around the Avesta, with its customs rigorously preserved. Although the Wahrams acquiesced to these demands, Narseh retaliated by endeavoring to establish the Sasan dynasty as the paramount authority. In the 3rd century CE, the church and state attained a balance in which neither could survive independently or dominate the other. Globally, Rome encountered a newly centralized empire with distinct geopolitical objectives and was unafraid of confrontation with the Mediterranean Empire. The existence of this Mediterranean empire, centered in Rome, Syria, and notably Mesopotamia, fostered the perception of it as an imperialistic entity. Mesopotamia functioned as the empire's core, with its capital, Ctesiphon, and an agricultural hub in Khuzestan, while the Roman fort situated to the west instilled caution in the Sasanians. This may be a principal reason Ardashir and Shah-Buerfar engaged in warfare against the Roman territories in those regions early on. Despite the ambiguity surrounding their eastern campaigns, the Sasanians successfully established a robust presence and fortified their border against the Kushans, Shabur, Armenia, and the conflicts in the west and the east. Hormizd 302-309 CE succeeded his father but achieved little militarily. Worse, during his reign, Armenia, under King Tiridates IV, embraced Christianity, which was detrimental to the Sasanians. Hormizd II endeavored to fortify Persian-Armenian relations by uniting his daughter Hormizd Duxtag in marriage with the Armenian prince Wahan Mamikonian. This union undoubtedly affected the allegiances of many Armenian noble families. Consequently, some Armenian feudal clans, Naxarars, converted and supported Tirdat against those loyal to the Sasanians, particularly those who adhered to the ancient Mazdean, Zoroastrian tradition of Armenia. Armenians have typically regarded this significant event as a departure from their ancient pagan history, during which the Armenian nation and identity were formed through Christianity. A different viewpoint is that of the Armenians, who remained unconverted to the new faith. Armenian historiography records Armenians loyal to their ancient heritage as either antagonists or devotees of Ormuzd, Anahit, and Vahagn. At the same time, Christian historians endeavored to expunge them from Armenian historical memory, retaining just a few malevolent figures. For numerous Armenian Naxarars, particularly those from noble lineages, their historical legacy and faith likely had significant value, making the transition to new customs and religion, Christianity, challenging. According to these Armenian nobility, King Tirdat was deemed a heretic for adopting a Western religion, displacing the Armenian Mazdeans who had venerated Ormazd from the 6th century BCE. James Russell has resolved the contemporary Armenian dichotomy between paganism and Christianity. Armenian historiography, characterized by its Christian perspective and antagonism towards Zoroastrianism, posits that Armenia was pagan, illiterate, and fragmented before adopting Christianity in the early 4th century, which fostered a cohesive vision and unified populace, or nation. Russell has demonstrated that the Armenians, despite the influence of Persian and Zoroastrian culture, possessed a distinct interpretation of Zoroastrianism that reflected an Armenian perspective. Thus, the few malevolent Naxarars referenced in Armenian historical accounts who aligned with the Sasanians were, in reality, individuals who opted to preserve their ancestral Armenian traditions at the cost of embracing the newcomers. The future of Armenia was not to be determined at this juncture, and the subsequent embrace of Christianity led to complications and fragmented Armenian society for an extended period. Following the demise of Hormizd II, the aristocracy and the clergy ousted his son Adur-Narsi, who reigned for a short duration. Hormizd II subsequently installed his newborn son, Shabur II, 309-379 CE, on the throne. Concerning this monarch, there is a tale in which the courtiers and clergy positioned the crown upon his mother's belly throughout her pregnancy. It can be inferred that in the initial years of his reign, the court and the Zoroastrian priests governed the empire, which was structurally and administratively secure and stable enough to endure without a powerful emperor. This situation also communicated to the courtiers and nobility that a formidable king could govern the empire to their benefit. While the Arabs in eastern Arabia plundered the southwestern provinces of the Sasanian Empire, Constantine and the other emperors contended for the essence of the Roman Empire, thereby safeguarding the Persians from the Western Front. Upon reaching maturity in 325 CE, Shabuhur II exacted retribution on the Arabs, earning the epithet shoulder piercer, alluding to the punishment administered to the Arab tribes. Consequently, his wars forced some Arabs into the interior of Arabia, while the Persian Gulf region remained under the control of the Sasanian Empire. This was a component of the Sasanians' overarching goal to secure the Persian Gulf. The Sasanian Empire forcibly dispossessed and resettled numerous Arab tribes. The Taghlib tribe resided at Darain, a port in Bahrain, and Al-Khat. The Abd al-Qais and Tamim inhabited Hajar, while the Bakr. There, the tribe also made their home. The Hanazila settled in Ramila, near Ahwaz, while Wa'il established itself in Kerman. Shabuhur II constructed a defensive structure referred to as the Wall of the Arabs to thwart additional Arab incursions. This wall is near Hira, later called Kandak-i-Shapur. Once more, we see the forced migration of Arabs into the Sasanian Empire orchestrated by Shabuhur Seku, specifically Bakr bi Wa'il and Banu Hanzala in Kerman and Khuzestan. Arabs and Persians had a relationship inside the confines of the Sasanian Empire. For the first time, the Kayonite tribes were reportedly encroaching upon the empire from Central Asia. However, Shabuhur II successfully contained them and established peace. Shabuhur II appointed his son, now designated as King of Kushan, to the throne in the east, as evidenced by coins and several inscriptions in Kushan territory. On the Western Front, the support of Armenia by the Roman authorities prompted Shabuhur II to initiate a military campaign against them. Upon Constantius' ascension to the throne, 337 to 338 CE, hostilities commenced with Shabuhur II besieging Nisibis on 3 occasions, resulting in persistent conflict that proved disadvantageous for both parties. The fortifications and limes obstructed Shabuhur's campaign in the area, although certain forts, like Vitra, succumbed to him. The incursion of nomadic tribes in Central Asia compelled Shabuhur II to redirect his focus eastward, and the conflict with Rome culminated in a stalemate by 350 CE. During this period, we first encounter the Hunnic tribes, perhaps the Kedarites, coming upon the Sasanian Empire and threatening India's Gupta Empire, 320–500 CE. Shabuhur Tzel, recently back from the Syrian war, might manage his eastern adversaries by forming an alliance with their monarch Grumbates against the Romans. By undertaking this action, he foresaw an ally who would initiate an assault on the Romans. Shapur II vanquished his eastern adversaries and instituted Sasanian supremacy over the Kushans. This theory is corroborated by 2 Middle Persian inscriptions indicating that the eastern boundary of the Sasanian Empire under Shabuhur II encompassed Sind, Sistan, and Turan. Additionally, Ammianus Marcellinus enumerates the provinces of the Sasanian Empire during that era as Assyria, Susiana, Media, Persis, Parthia, and Greater Carmania. Hyrcania, Margiana, the Bactrian, the Sogdiani, the Sakai, and Scythia at the base of Emaus, Himalayas, along with Serica, Aria, the Paropanisadai, Drangiana, Arachosia, and Gedrosia, beyond the mountain. Altabar further notes that Shapur II, in his urban development initiatives, founded cities in Sind and Sijistan, thereby affirming his dominion over that territory. Ultimately, most gold coins issued by Shabuhur II originate from eastern mints, such as Marl, where the Kushans similarly produced gold coins. Numerous copper coins from the mints of Sakistan and Kabul are extant. This suggests that Shabuhur II may have procured substantial quantities of gold and other precious metals from his vanquished eastern adversaries. In 359 CE, Shapur II, supported by King Grumbates, invaded Syria, besieged Amida, captured it after 73 days, and relocated its inhabitants to Khuzestan. Shapur II besieged the city of Amida and exiled its inhabitants as retribution for the murder of the Kedarite king's son. In 361 CE, the newly appointed Roman Emperor, Julian, launched a counteroffensive and achieved successes against Shapur II in 363 CE, including a siege of Ctesiphon. Nevertheless, chaos and looting within the Roman ranks hindered the seizure of the capital. In expectation of Julian's triumph over the Persians, an inscription was erected in the upper Jordan Valley bearing the premature title of Bar Rvm Extinction, likely due to his early success in Antioch in March of 363. A Persian defector named Hormizd commanded the cavalry among the Roman generals. Julian obliterated his naval vessels to prevent his troops from retreating, prompting Shapur II to implement a scorched earth strategy in Mesopotamia, leading to famine among the Roman army. In June of 363, Persian forces armed with elephants vanquished the Romans, resulting in Julian sustaining severe wounds, likely inflicted by a contophoroi, a cavalry spearman, leading to his demise in his tent. Eutropius, an eyewitness to the campaign, corroborates that the enemy was responsible for Julian's death. Jovian was elected emperor and was compelled to negotiate peace with Shapur II, which the Romans referred to as ignobili decreto, or shameful treaty, losing eastern Mesopotamia, Armenia, and adjacent territories, along with 15 strongholds in Nisibis. Surenna communicated 92 Persian terms and conditions, consenting to relocate the predominantly Christian populace of Nisibis to Roman territory. Surenna's conversely elevated the Persian standard above the city. Jovian departed from Mesopotamia, and the Romans refrained from further engagement with the Sasanians, since Emperor Valens was occupied with Germanic tribes in the Balkans. In the early years of Shapur II's life, under King Tirdades IV, 298-330, Armenia embraced Christianity in 314 CE. Consequently, several Armenian feudal clans known as Naxarars shifted their allegiance to Tirdades IV, opposing those Naxarars who remained faithful to the Sasanians. The Naxarars continued to adhere to the ancient Zoroastrian tradition of Armenia and venerated Ormizd, Anahit, and Vahang. The unstable internal conflict and fluctuating allegiances of the Naxarars, the monarch, and the clergy initiated a tumultuous era in Armenian history, with ambiguous records from this period. King Tiran, who endeavored to maintain Armenia's independence by maneuvering between the Romans and the Persians, perished at the hands of Shapur. He was succeeded by his son Arshak II, 350-367 CE, who initially sought to placate the Romans and Persians but ultimately allied with Julian's campaign against the Sasanians. As stipulated in the peace treaty between Shapur II and Jovian, Armenia and Georgia were to fall under Sasanian dominion, with the Romans prohibited from interfering in Armenian matters. The Armenian king was captured by the Persians and confined in the Castle of Oblivion, referred to in Armenian sources as the Fortress of Andmash, or Castle of Anyush in Khuzestan, where he reportedly committed suicide during a visit from his eunuch Drastamat. Artashat, Vawarshapat, Eruandashat, Zarehawan, Zarishat, Van, and Nakshvan were captured, resulting in the deportation of their populations, which included numerous Jewish families. The pro-Persian Naxarars, Vahan Mamikonian, and Merujan Arkruni, assisted Shapur II and received rewards for their contributions, while two Persians, Zik and Karen, were appointed to oversee Armenian matters with a substantial military force. Georgia was placed under Persian dominion, where Shapur Seku appointed Aspakurs in eastern Georgia. However, the Roman Emperor Valens ultimately succeeded in establishing Sauromases in western Georgia. Pap, 367-374 CE, the progeny of the Armenian sovereign Arshak, who sought refuge with the Romans, was installed on the throne in 367 with Roman support. The Armenians successfully resisted the assault of Shabur II. 100 ppapk was unpopular among many Naxarars and the Armenian Church due to his pro-Aryan stance, which led to his vilification by Armenian sources influenced by his mother's religious convictions, Queen Paranjem of Siunik. 101. Pap fell prey to internal discord and conflicts among Naxarars and the Sparapet under the governance of Emperor Valens. 102. Nevertheless, Armenia saw the presence of Shabur II and Valens in 377 CE, resulting in relative tranquility in the Caucasus. The Zoroastrian priest Adurbad I Marspandan was tasked with canonizing the Avesta and the Zoroastrian heritage. According to Richard Fry, the initial appearance of the Ottoman millet system emerged during this period, when the Christian bishop lived in Ctesiphon and, together with the Jewish exilarch, paid his poll tax in exchange for peace and security. During this period, religious communities were forming, and the groundwork for a late antique society in Persia was established by Zoroastrian priests, Jewish rabbis, and Christian clergy. The extent to which Shabur II could diminish the influence of the grandees and the clergy remains uncertain. However, his prowess as a ruler enabled him to uphold his authority. The sole indication that the Zoroastrian clergy may have exerted influence over the monarchy is that Shabur II is among the final kings to refer to himself as whose lineage is from the gods. The King of Kings may have ultimately transitioned into a secular ruler with diminished religious authority. At this point in history, the Sasanian monuments vanished in Persis and emerged in the north in Media. The king may have deemed the Zoroastrian priests in Persis excessively powerful, prompting him to relocate them from their usual bastion to a new temple with a revised picture. The motivations behind the king's actions and the adoption of the new titles remain ambiguous. The artistic style differs from that of Persis. The image of Mithra gains prominence with Ormazd. Ardashir II and Shabuhar III are depicted in a static frontal stance, accompanied by two diminutive Middle Persian inscriptions that feature the conventional formula initially adopted by Ardashir Awai on his coins and inscriptions. They neither receive a diadem from the deities nor triumphant over adversaries. Instead, they pose for a personal portrait. The monuments of Ardashir II, 379-383 CE, and his son, Shabuhar III, 383-388 CE, are located in Takabustan. The kings above, including Wahram IV, 3888-399 CE, all experienced violent demises, indicating the increasing influence of the nobility and the clergy since the era of Shabur II. This ascendant power of the nobility is further evidenced by the succinct account of Ardashir II's reign, wherein it is noted that he eliminated numerous prominent figures and authority holders to diminish their power. During the reign of Wahram IV, Armenia forfeited its independence. The western region was annexed by the Roman Empire, while the eastern portion was governed by Wahram Vramshapu, the brother of the King of Kings who appointed Vramshapu as king of Persamenia in 394 CE. Wahram IV's most significant accomplishment was halting the Huns who had invaded Syria and northern Mesopotamia. The Armenians perceived Christianity as a significant danger to Zoroastrianism and a departure from ancient tradition in the 4th century CE. By embracing Christianity, Armenia and Georgia drew nearer to the Eastern Roman Empire. Initially, Constantine and his successors facilitated the flourishing of Christianity, subsequently intertwining it with the emperor and the empire. The Roman emperors regarded themselves as the leaders of all Christians globally. Hence, Christians within the Sasanian Empire were viewed with suspicion. A formidable monarch like Shabur the Cent and a Zoroastrian cleric such as Edurbadar Marspandan responded to the growth of Christianity. This ineffective strategy resulted in identifying an alternative solution to mitigate the issue in the 5th century CE. A formidable and enduring monarch such as Shabuhar II stabilized the Sasanian Empire and fortified its western and southern frontiers. Shabuhar Seg seemingly regulated the movement of eastern nomadic tribes such as the Huns and Kedarites. Shabuhar II established an alliance and a sense of loyalty with the Huns, and subsequently, the Kedarites. Shabuhar II's incursions into the Arabian Peninsula and coastal areas aimed not only to penalize the Arab tribes, but also to perhaps secure the Persian Gulf region. The Sasanians could now assert ownership of the Persian Gulf. The fortification of the Zoroastrian clergy hierarchy would transform the institution of kingship. The King of Kings was no longer seen as a descendant of the gods, Yazda-en, but as a secular sovereign who remained a devotee of Mazda, Yazgurt-es, and relations with Christianity. During the reign of Yazgurd, Farnt 3999-420 CE, a novel ideological perspective and approach towards minorities inside the empire emerged. His coins bear the inscription, "Who maintains peace in his dominion." Ramshahar, although Sasanian sources referred to him as a sinner, Arabic Alatham, Persian Bazaar. This constitutes unequivocal priestly propaganda, as he not only executed some Zoroastrian priests who disparaged his advantageous policies towards religious minorities, but also extended favorable treatment to Jews and Christians. Christianity was officially recognized as a religion when the inaugural synod of the Nestorian Church convened in 410 CE, under the reign of Yazgurd I. Agathis characterizes Yazgurd the Firm as a pro-Christian sovereign, but more significantly, as a friendly and peaceable ruler who never engaged in warfare against the Romans. Thus his title would be appropriate for the era, and we can also relate this to Khayanid ideology. In the Middle Persian epic Ayadgar-u-Zareran, the Testament of Zara, the final Khayanid monarch, Kai-Wishtasp, is referred to as Ramshar, a designation also found in the D.N. card. The title implies an inclination towards an Avestan Khayanid ideology before encountering terms such as Khayanid and Exwara glory. The extent to which this novel ideological framework is influenced by interactions with the East remains uncertain. However, the growing focus on the empire's eastern frontiers likely affected the king's perspective. The reign of Yazdgurt then is universally regarded as tranquil and courteous towards the Roman Empire. Emperor Arcadius, 383-408 CE, requested the Persian ruler to serve as the guardian of his son, Theodosius II, a custom that persisted with both the Romans and Persians occasionally seeking guardianship for the heirs to their respective thrones. This conduct signifies that during the 5th century, both empires saw one another as equals, deserving of having their heirs at one another's courts, or merely prioritizing succession while being more apprehensive about internal descent than of each other's military might. It is essential to remember that before Yazgurd III, the 3 successive kings met violent ends at the hands of the aristocracy. Consequently, Yazgurd III responded by executing many nobles, earning him the designation of sinner in the official Sasanian annals. The title of Yazdgurd may reflect his tolerance for diverse religions, the initiation of a new era of Christianity in Persia, and the establishment of equilibrium among the monarchy, noble families, and Zoroastrian priests. Wahram Gur, issues in the East and Christian persecution. In 414 CE, at the death of Yazgud I, his eldest son, Shabur, Wahram Shabur, Armenian Vramshapu, departed Armenia to ascend to the throne. However, he was assassinated by the nobility who subsequently installed Khusro, a non-direct descendant of Yazdgerd I, as ruler. This action indicates the disdain of the nobles and priestly class for Yazdgerd I's actions, ultimately jeopardizing his sons. Wahram, another son of Yazdgerd I, who had been dispatched to the Arab court at Al-Hira, returned with a predominantly Arab army and compelled Khusro to abdicate in 421 CE. Wahram, 421-438 CE, was widely regarded as a successful ruler. In 422 CE, a peace treaty was established in the West, granting religious freedom to Christians in the Sasanian Empire and Zoroastrians in the Roman Empire. This occurred within the persecution of Christians, which appears to have commenced after Yazdgerd I's tenure around 114, or more likely at the onset of Wahram's reign, incited by the Zoroastrian priests. He vanquished the Hephthalites, an eastern tribe, eliminating their king and halting their incursion into the empire's eastern frontiers. During his campaign, he seemingly entrusted his youngest brother, Narse, with authority, and, upon Wahram's return, Narse was designated as the ruler of Khorasan. The office of Wuzurg Framada-Ar was also conferred upon Meher-Narse. In 116, Armenia's status altered as the Armenian Naxarars once more solicited assistance from the Sasanians to depose their monarch Artashes, the progeny of Ramshapu. In 428 CE, Wahram V deposed him and appointed a margrave, Marzban, in Armenia, initiating the Marzpanate period. Numerous romantic narratives exist regarding Wahram V, including the importation of Indian minstrels as entertainers, lures, and his fondness for drinking and hunting, which earned him the title of Gur-Onogur. Early Persian compilations also ascribe to Wahram V the authorship of the first Persian poem, a claim that lacks credibility. His enigmatic demise in Media, Mah, illustrates his creativity since he vanished into marshes or a well during a hunt and was never located. He was also commemorated by the creators of the Zoroastrian apocalyptic scriptures as the individual who ushered in an era of peace, during which evil and demons retreated into obscurity. During the initial years of Yazdgerd II's reign, 438 to 457 CE, attention turned eastward, engaging in conflict with the group referred to in historical records as the Kushans, perhaps the Huns. Yazdgerd temporarily stationed himself in Khorasan to protect the empire's eastern border, during which the Sasanians seized Bactria. He subsequently advanced towards Armenia and Albania, as it was crucial to safeguard the Caucasus from the westward advance of the Huns, a campaign that included the Romans. Further complications arose in Armenia, likely instigated by Mir-Narse, Wuzurg Framadar, Armenian Vzurk Ramatar, who promulgated an edict reinstating Zoroastrianism as the official religion in Armenia. This edict offers a compelling insight into the Zurvanite inclination of Mir-Narse and the rationale for the Armenians' conversion to Zoroastrianism. This incited a rebellion among certain Armenian Naxars who had converted to Christianity. The Armenians were not unified for this cause, leading to the annihilation of their forces at the Battle of Avarer in 451 CE, commanded by Vardan of the Mamikonian lineage, with many subsequently deported to Persia. The Armenian Christian populace did not forget this disaster, utilizing it as a symbol of resistance and remembrance against their Zoroastrian neighbors. This anti-Christian action affected not only Armenian Christians, but also Syriac martyrologies from this period that documented the persecution of Christians and Jews. Thus, Yazdgerd II is commemorated by Zoroastrian priests in the Sasanian Chronicle as a ruler who vanquished his adversaries, non-Zoroastrians, while exhibiting benevolence towards the Zoroastrians in the military. Regarding imperial philosophy, he is the first figure to adopt the new title of Mazdaean Majesty K, modern by Ki. This indicates that the empire in which these coins were circulated no longer venerated the Sasanian kings as deities, but linked them to the Khayanid Avestan dynasty. It is important to note that this movement originated with Yazdgerd III and the title Ramshar, with K representing the second embodiment of this Khayanid worldview. This Avestan inclination is particularly intriguing since it coincides with the Sasanian king's renewed focus on the East, during which he remained in that region for several years. His infatuation with the Khayanids cannot be ascribed to his residence in Khorasan or interactions with Bactria, as the Ramshar title was already established. The Sasanians fully embraced the Khayanid identity shown in various titles that will be examined later. The Khayanid philosophy suggests that instead of regarding the Achaemenids as their forebears, they may have perceived Achaemenid monuments as creations of the monarchs of Persis. They identified themselves with the primordial rulers, particularly the Khayanid kings mentioned in the Avesta. The two sons of Yazdgerd II, Hormizd III, 457–459 CE, and Peros, 459–484 CE, governed sequentially, although the latter usurped the former during a power struggle. Peros escaped eastward to Khorasan, where a force likely composed of Kidarites or Hephthalites reclaimed the throne. Simultaneously, although Hormizd III may have anointed himself, reports indicate that their mother, Denag, was administering the capital or portions thereof. Amidst this turmoil, Albania attained independence, exposing the empire's eastern borders to Hephthalite incursions. Upon ascending to the throne, Peroz subdued Albania while permitting the Armenians to adhere to Christianity and agreed with the Eastern Roman Empire to collaborate in safeguarding the Caucasus passes. The Sasanians confronted the Hephthalites in Khorasan, where Khwash-Nawaz seized Peroz, along with his harem and entourage, in 469 CE. This disaster transpired during the third significant battle, whereas the Romans partially funded his campaign in the initial two. This marked the nadir of Sasanian authority, as they became vassals to the Hephthalites and relinquished territory to them in exchange for the king's return and his retinue to Sasanian lands. The Hephthalites retained the chief priest, Mobed, Kavad, son of Peroz, along with his daughter as hostages for security. The Romans refrained from assaulting Persia during this period due to Emperor Zeno's domestic challenges, which precluded his focus on the Eastern Front. During this period, religious persecutions, particularly targeting the Jews, were prevalent, alongside widespread drought and famine inside the empire, as well as a revolt in Armenia in 482 CE. 126. However, Peroz was responsible for avenging his defeat in the east. In 484 CE, his actions resulted in the loss of his life, 7 sons, and his whole army. This is where the renowned legend of Peroz's pearl earring emerges, an item so valuable that he cast it to the ground before his death to prevent anybody from possessing it. The brief reign of Balash, Walax, 484–488 CE, was unremarkable, and due to the empire's fragility, the king maintained amicable relations with Armenia and the Hephthalites by contributions to the latter. Noble families seemingly ruled Balash, and notably, we observe the encroaching influence of Parthian noble families during this era. Zarmir Sokhra, of the Karen clan, who salvaged the Sasanian army following Peroz's demise, and Shabur of the Meran clan, are two notable individuals. In 4999 CE, the nobility and the clergy removed Balazs and installed Kavad Fur 488, 496, 4999, 531 CE as king. An overview of the 5th century. The 5th century kings were typically feeble, allowing the nobility and Zoroastrian priests to wield sway at the expense of the court. Certain monarchs, such as Yazdgerd I, imposed penalties on certain Zoroastrian priests and the aristocracy to diminish their influence. Nevertheless, this delayed their eventual ascendance to power within the Sasanian state for a short period. However, this did not imply that the empire was ineffectual or decentralized. Under the priest's supervision, the bureaucratic structure attained a level of sophistication that ensured the empire's stability despite the death of a king, benefiting both the priests and the nobility. The increasing quantity of titles on administrative seals totaling 130, and the emergence of mint markings on coins further illustrate this centralization. The empire's economy was deteriorating due to drought, hunger, and devastating battles which necessitated substantial tribute payments to the Hephthalites. Also, there were no victories in the west to facilitate the acquisition of money from the Romans. Kavad, Mazdak, and chaos. Consequently, Kavad encountered economic and political challenges that beset the empire near the conclusion of the 5th century. Currently, we possess information regarding Zoroastrian sectarianism throughout the Sasanian Empire. During the initial phase of Kavad's reign, a Zoroastrian priest named Mazdak drew Kavad I's attention, facilitating reforms that transcended conventional religious doctrine and the prevailing social hierarchy. Mazdak introduced a social reform that incited much animosity among the Zoroastrian priests, particularly after its implementation. Mazdak advocated for an egalitarian social system that emphasized equality in income, women, and property distribution, as per several sources. Byzantine sources indicate that Kavad instructed Persians to engage in communal relations with their women. Mazdak's theological and cosmological perspectives, which will be examined in the religion chapter, also influenced politics and society. However, it is essential to consider the Mazdakite movement as a political instrument for Kavad. Kavad employed Mazdak's concepts to diminish the authority of the nobility and grandees. The substantial landowners and clergy increasingly engaged in state affairs and often lacked integrity. The class division in the Avesta, or potentially the interpretation by Zoroastrian priests, was at odds with Mazdak's doctrine. Mazdak presented a fresh and potentially innovative view of the Zoroastrian tradition. The Mazdakite ideology facilitated Kavad's consolidation of power and the subjugation of the aristocracy, regardless of his personal convictions. They allocated imperial granaries and redistributed land to the peasants. The Zoroastrian scriptures, authored by the priests opposing this reform, depict this era as one of disorder, characterized by communal sharing of women and a loss of knowledge regarding genealogy. In 496 CE, the discontented aristocracy and clergy had Kavad apprehended and confined in the prison of oblivion, subsequently installing his brother Zamasp on the throne for several years. Zamasp's compassion and sense of equity, probably shaped by anti-Mazdakite propaganda, prompted him to seek the reversal of Kavad's reforms. Kavad, aided by his sister, fled to the Hephthalites. He assembled an army and reclaimed the throne in 499 CE, following Zamasp's abdication in his favor. This action also illustrated the empire's precarious condition, wherein a diminutive force could overwhelm the coalition of aristocracy and clergy in turmoil. Kavad imposed the Mazdakite faith on the empire's populace, likely pleasing many, particularly the lower classes and the Sasanian clients, including the Arabs in Najd and Hijaz around the early 6th century. After stabilizing the economic, political, and social landscape, Kavad initiated reforms essential to the empire in the 6th century, typically attributed to Khusro I. The position of protector of the poor and judge was established by the Mobeds, chief priests, to assist the impoverished and oppressed, reflecting both a response to the Mazdakite movement and a broader trend within Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and subsequently Islam. Administratively, 4 chanceries, Diwa-en, were established for the empire, perhaps aligning with the military division under the command of 4 generals. Before this, an Iran Spabed commanded the army. Nevertheless, it has become very challenging to simultaneously engage on multiple fronts. During his reign, the survey of agricultural areas and the reformation of the tax system commenced, alongside the establishment of new districts within the empire. 138. Christian Nestorianism was formally sanctioned in Persia, and by the age of Khusro I, the Christian leader held the title of Iran Catholicos. 139. Fortunately for the Sasanians, the Hephthalites were annihilated and fragmented by 515 CE. Conversely, circumstances diverged in the West, culminating in a prolonged conflict commencing in 502 CE, concluding an extended era of tranquility. Procopius indicates that Kavad was indebted to the Hephthalites. However, another account posits that the Persians were dissatisfied due to the Romans' reluctance to assist in the defense against the Huns. Kavad successfully invaded Armenia and captured Theodosiopolis. Subsequently, he advanced westward from Armenia and besieged Amida in Mesopotamia, ultimately seizing it. Kavad continued his westward excursions, but failed in his plundering campaign for loot. Nonetheless, the Persians gained advantages from the negotiations, resulting in the cessation of hostilities in 506 CE. In 524, King Gorgenes of Iberia allied with the Romans in response to Kavad's attempts to enforce Zoroastrianism. This action jeopardized Persian dominance over the kingdom, but they successfully maintained tight control of the region by 528 CE. In 527 CE, Mesopotamia experienced most subsequent conflicts, with the Arab tribes and the Huns also participating. By 529 CE, discussions collapsed, and Kavad invaded Dara in 530 CE, coinciding with Justinian's rule. He sent his competent general, Belisarius, to protect the city from the Persian general, Mehran. Additional operations occurred on the Mesopotamian-Syrian border and in Armenia in 531 CE. However, none of these conflicts yielded a definitive victor. Khusro reforms and the Sasanian Renaissance. During this period, the Sasanian resurgence resulted in the Persian hegemony of Georgia, portions of interior Arabia, and Oman. 144 Persians had already established themselves in Central Asia, and merchants had traveled to India, China, and Indonesia. They prioritized commercial interests and sought to dominate the spice and silk trade, driven by economic profit rather than state-sponsored initiatives. Upon Kavad's death in 531 CE, the Mazdakites endorsed his eldest son, Kawus, as the heir, sharing a Kayanid name with his father. The court and religious authorities opted to support Khusro I, who was younger and opposed Mazdakism. Kawus governed in the northern region of Tabaristan and engaged in combat with Khusro I, but was finally vanquished. By this time, Khusro I played a pivotal role in the assassination of Mazdak and numerous followers who had confidently declared their loyalty to him. While the Shahnameh may amplify the demise of the Mazdakites, it has indelibly influenced the Persian psyche by depicting their conclusion. Khusro possessed a property with towering walls. He ordered the digging of pits and had the adherents of Mazdak interred therein, with their heads buried and feet elevated. He subsequently instructed Mazdak to enter the estate garden to observe the seeds he had sown that had yielded fruit. And upon seeing his followers in such a condition, the Mode exclaimed in anguish and collapsed. He was subsequently hanged alive and executed by volleys of arrows. After the narrative, Ferdowsi asserts, "If you possess wisdom, refrain from pursuing the path of Mazdak." Khusro Dhyarn's 531 TE, 579 CE epitomizes the philosopher-king in Sasanian and Near Eastern history. There are so many attributes to him that differentiating fact from fiction can be difficult. He continued to captivate the imagination of the region's populace during the decline of the Sasanians and the advent of Islam. The reforms and alterations instituted by Khusro I would serve as a model for monarchs, caliphs, and sultans. Before implementing significant alterations, he required consolidating his authority on the throne. Initially, his brother Kewus, whose stronghold was located in northern Mazandara, challenged his authority. Historical records suggest that the nobles opposed Mazdak, and his adherents aligned with Khusro I. However, Khusro I effectively pursued his father's administrative and economic reform program, necessitating a reduction in the power of the formidable aristocratic houses. Following this event, Khusro I positioned himself as the anti-Mazdakite contender, seeking an era of stability and social order, although he was establishing a new order after the loss and obliteration of the previous one. Upon ascending to power as an anti-Mazdakite, Khusro I did not reinstate the authority of affluent noble families and the extensive landed nobility. Rather, he preferred the minor landholding gentry, referred to in Middle Persian and Perso-Arabic sources as Dehgans. The Dehgans would serve as the cornerstone of the Sasanian military and, crucially, the state's economic base as tax collectors. Persian culture and history were preserved until the 11th century, when a destitute individual finalized the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. Khusro constructed a series of defensive walls to fortify the borders of the Persian Empire, akin to Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain and the Great Wall of China. The Persian walls were constructed at the peripheries of the empire's four edges. One was constructed in the northeast, along the Gurgan plain, to protect against the Hephthalites, another in the northwest at the Caucasus passes, one in the southeast, and one in the southwest known as the Wall of the Arabs in southern Persia. Intellectually, connections and concepts have emerged with other individuals, particularly from India and Rome. India provided and translated materials on medicine, astronomy, treatises for rulers, fables, narratives, and guides for games such as chess. Translators introduced musical instruments, diverse scientific works, medicinal treatises, and philosophical writings from Rome. Several philosophers traveled to the court of Khusro from Athens, particularly following the closure of the Neo-Platonist school by Justinian. Plato's philosopher king signifies Khusro's engagement with philosophy. In a subsequent chapter, we will address the cultural evolution within the Sasanian Empire. Khusro I and the Roman Emperor Justinian epitomized the enlightened monarchs and notable rulers of late antiquity. Persian scriptures discuss Khusro I's sense of justice, the codification of laws, presumably initiated by Khusro I and completed by Khusro II, the Madhyana Hazar Dadistan, and simultaneous reforms in the military and governance across both empires. Scholars debate the extent of influence one king had on the other. Nevertheless, instead of perceiving the interaction unidirectionally, it is more insightful to consider the ties as reciprocal, with each monarch motivating and potentially striving to surpass the other. Khusro I implemented new administrative and military advances and finalized Qawad's reforms. He partitioned the empire into 4 parts, appointing a general to each quadrant. Instead of the formidable general of the Iranians, there were 4 generals. The area encompasses the northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest quadrants. He established a registry, or diwan, for the military. He additionally recruited various tribal groups, such as the Daylamites, to strengthen the military, ultimately resulting in a distinct military structure whose allegiance was to the king. Tax reforms were implemented, whereby taxes were levied not solely on the land area but also on the nature of the product or produce. Conflict in the East and West. Khusro. I successfully revitalized the Sasanian Empire through these measures. His military triumphs exemplify the efficacy of these changes. In the eastern region during 557–558 CE, Khusro vanquished the Hephthalites, and from 572 to 577 CE, he thwarted Turkic invasions into the Near East. Khusro sought and finalized negotiations with Justinian in the west, resulting in the Eternal Peace in 532 CE, which was advantageous for the Persians. The Persians were compensated with gold to secure the Caucasus Pass and maintain dominion over most of Armenia and Iberia, while the Romans abandoned their strongholds in Mesopotamia. In 540 CE, however, Khusro commenced a campaign in the west, prompted by Gothic king Vitiges regarding Justinian's military actions in North Africa and Italy, alongside Armenian appeals for Persian assistance. He initiated his campaign in Mesopotamia and Syria, successfully seizing the city of Antioch. In 542 CE, Khusro launched another campaign, but a plague deterred him from advancing further. In 543 CE, warfare persisted, resulting in a Roman defeat in Armenia, followed by a Persian siege of Edessa in 544, during which a substantial quantity of gold was extracted from its residents. In 540 CE, prompted by the Armenians and the Lazics, Khusro launched another invasion of Armenia to mitigate Roman interference. The conflict, commencing in 541 and concluding in 557 CE, culminated in a negotiated peace. Khusro advanced to the eastern frontiers of his empire, engaging in combat against the Hephthalites, achieving victory, and subsequently asserting dominion over the territories next to the Oxus. The truce persisted until 565 CE, the year of Justinian's death. Upon ascending to the throne, Justin II asserted his claim over Suania, precipitating a conflict that resulted in significant setbacks for the Romans. By 573 CE, the Persians had achieved considerable territorial advancements in the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and Syria. Dara was once more captured by Khusro the Firn, which adversely affected the ailing Justin. With the new emperor's ascension, Tiberius, negotiations regarding Mesopotamia ensued. However, hostilities persisted in the Caucasus between 574 and 575 CE, and subsequently in Mesopotamia. This phase of the conflict persisted during the reign of Emperor Maurice and extended into the 7th century. Khusro established a presence on the Arabian Peninsula, reaching as far as Yemen. Due to his remarkable victories and accomplishments, Khusro inscribed on his special issue coinage phrases such as "Iranians have become fearless" and "Iranians have become strong." A philosopher king governs this Sasanian Empire at the height of its glory and power. Hormizd Sefor, 579 to 590 CE, the son of Khusro, did not attain his father's magnificence or political vision. Hormizd IV acquired numerous adversaries at court owing to his hubris and despotism. According to Ceballos, Hormizd IV was accountable for executing numerous nobles, engendering widespread animosity towards him. He endorsed the landed gentry or deans, who likely gained power at the expense of the nobility, Azadaen, and treated the Zoroastrian priests with severity. In the east, in 589 CE, the Turks encountered the Sasanian general Wahram Chubin, whose triumph against them rendered the general renowned within the empire. He belonged to the illustrious Abbasid lineage of Mehran, whose ancestry predates that of the Sasanians. Following Wahram Chubin's minor defeat in Armenia to the Romans, Hormizd IV defamed him and levied false accusations, prompting the general to revolt and advance toward Ctesiphon. They ousted the king and elevated his son Khusro II to power with the support of the nobility, spearheaded by Wisdom and Window. The events occurred in 589–590 CE. Marking the first instance of an individual outside the Sasanian family attempting to seize control of the empire, likely astonishing the Sasanian dynasty. This may illustrate the robustness of the centralized system and the shortcomings of Sasanian imperial propaganda, particularly during the reign of a feeble or despised monarch. The institutions restored and fortified under the reigns of Kavad and Khusro, I had become so robust and established that they operated independently of the prevailing political turmoil. Similarly, local affairs saw the deans ascend to significant official roles, rendering local issues more pertinent to the populace than the political matters of the empire. It might be posited that the Sasanian imperial image sustained more harm during the 7th century, during the Arab-Muslim conquest. Yet this did not significantly disrupt the empire's institutions and officials as the system persisted under Muslim governance. The Caliphate's implementation of the Persian administrative framework and its personnel exemplify this. Khusro II and the empire at its peak. In the late 6th century CE, Khusro II, 590–628 CE, was unable to resist the armies of Wahram Chubin and felt insecure within the empire, prompting his flight to the Eastern Roman Empire in 590 CE, where he sought shelter in Hierapolis and assistance from Emperor Maurice. The Roman emperor provided Roman and predominantly Armenian troops to Khusro II, facilitating his return to the empire that year and his victory over Wahram. At Khusro's urging, the Turks ultimately killed the now defector general in the east. Wahram regarded himself as a legitimate monarch, as evidenced by his minting of coins for 2 years, 590–591 CE. The first year in the southwest, mostly in Iraq and Media, and the second year in the northeast, where he had sought refuge. Posthumously, Wahram captivated the populace, inspiring the creation of songs and narratives about him that endure in Arabic and Persian. Khusro, as king, pursued retribution against those responsible for his father's death, while his innocence remains uncertain. His uncle Wisdom, a follower of Khusro, was pursued by his adversaries, prompting him to relocate to Media, where he produced coins bearing his own name and likely resided until 600 CE, 166. During the latter decade of the 6th century, 2 persons whom the Sasanians did not acknowledge as legitimate kings minted coinage. This is noteworthy as, for 366 years, only the Sasanian monarch had the prerogative to produce coins bearing his name. In light of the harm to Sasanian prestige, we may now examine Khusro II's conquests. Khusro II solidified his authority in the Persian Gulf and dispatched envoys to Arabia, reaching as far as Mecca to assess the circumstances. Al-Nu'man III ibn al-Mundir, the final monarch of Al-Hira, was assassinated, and the Lakhmid realm was placed under the control of other Persian loyalists in 602 CE. Following the assassination of Roman Emperor Maurice and the ascension of Phocas, Khusro II exploited this occurrence as a justification for the invasion of Syria and adjacent territories. Khusro II initially seized Roman Armenia in 167, and his 2 generals, Shahin and Shawaraz, rapidly subdued Syria in 604 CE. In 619 CE, the Persians subjugated Palestine, Egypt, and Libya, and annexed Anatolia from 619 to 622 CE. Antiochus Strategos provides detailed accounts of the conquest of Jerusalem in 614 CE and the capture of the Holy Cross, which elicited a negative response in the Roman Empire and was widely mourned. This event shocked the Eastern Roman Empire, which appointed Heraclius as its emperor in 610 CE. Although Heraclius intended to depart for North Africa, it is reported that he was convinced by the clergy to remain, and with the support of church funds he initiated a counter-offensive. In 624 CE, he traversed from the Black Sea into Armenia and penetrated the core of the Persian Empire, plundering the revered Adur-Farabe shrine at Ganzak, 172, in retribution for the Sasanian seizure of the True Cross from Jerusalem. The initial genuine crusade between the Christian realm and the East occurred before the Arab Muslims' conquests. The Persian nobility and their affiliates retreated from Syria and Iraq alongside the withdrawing Persian army. In a few years, Khusro Setu transitioned from a world conqueror, mirroring the Achaemenid territorial cohesion, to a disgraced monarch unable to safeguard the revered Zoroastrian fire temples and his populace. The nobility and clergy deposed Khusro II in 628 CE, and all seized regions were restored to the Romans by 630 CE. Imperial ideology, kingship, and authority in the 7th century. Regarding imperial philosophy, it can be stated that the early Sasanians, although claiming descent from the gods, also employed Persian Achaemenid and Parthian titles such as King of Kings on their coins and inscriptions. Adopting the Khayanid doctrine from the 4th to the 6th century CE marginalized this heritage. Khusro Seku, however, reinstated the combined legacy of Achaemenid and Khayanid philosophy by issuing coins bearing his name with the title King of Kings, and for the first time inscribing the slogan, "Increased in Glory." Swara is fundamental to ancient Persian royal ideology, as evidenced in the Avesta, and is essential for governance in the Iranian realm. Persian art commonly illustrates this grandeur by surrounding the king's head with a halo. Khusro II was a martial sovereign akin to the monarchs of the early Sasanian era. His grotto at Takabustan depicts him in complete body armor, emblematic of the Sasanian heavy cavalry, and features the deity Anahid, the mistress of the waters, above him. Khusro II epitomizes the zenith of Sasanian absolutism and a final resurgence of former grandeur. At Takabustan, Ormazd reigned supreme, accompanied by two more deities, Miher and Anahid. These are the triad of deities venerated by Artaxerxes II in the 5th century BCE, indicating a complete resurgence of devotion to these entities. The grandeur of Khusro II's court is vividly illustrated by the Taku Bustan rock sculpture, depicting the monarch on a boat engaged in hunting, accompanied by musicians playing harps and a retinue. Khusro II is remembered in Persian history as a lavish monarch who led to the decline of the Persian Empire. His religious policy, particularly his interest in Christianity, may have contributed to his condemnation by the Zoroastrians. His favored spouse, Shirin, is renowned in epic and romantic literature, and is also credited with promoting Christianity within the empire with his other Christian wife, Mariam, an Eastern Roman princess. Fratricide and the dissolution of the Sasanian Empire. Kavad II ascended to the throne in 628 CE, following Khusro II. He perpetrated fratricide, eliminating nearly all eligible or competent male heirs within the Sasanian lineage. This may be attributed to his father Khusro II, designating his younger brother, Madrasa, as his successor. Nevertheless, Kavad the Kha's actions would profoundly impact the empire's future. He sought to dissociate himself from his father's legacy, a sentiment seen in his coinage, which returned to the design of Khusro I. In 629 CE, Kavad II established a peace treaty with Heraclius, returning all territories held by the Sasanians. The Persian general Shahrwaraz encountered the emperor at Arabissus Tripotamos, where the Euphrates were designated as the permanent boundary between the Sasanian, Persian, and Roman empires. Kavad II, like his siblings, met his end, underscoring the unstable condition of royal matters in Ctesiphon. In 630 CE, Ardashir III, the youthful son of Kavad, ascended to the throne, and during his reign the Sasanian dynasty faced a third assault from an external adversary. This was the Sasanian general who commanded the forces of Khusro II, Shahrwaraz. He promptly entered Ctesiphon's capital, terminated the young king's reign, and declared himself the new king of kings. His actions may have been partially influenced by his reverence for Khusro, since he exacted punishment and executed all individuals involved in the assassination of the deceased monarch. One Armenian source indicates that his peace with Heraclius in 629 CE, perhaps supported by the latter, motivated Shahrwaraz to seize the throne. This represented a significant blow to Sasanian imperial philosophy. Nevertheless, he could not retain his position and perished within a few months. Queen Buran and the deterioration of Sasanian legitimacy. Buran, one of the daughters of Khusro II, ascended to the throne in 630 CE and reigned for 2 years. Her tenure marked a period of imperial authority consolidation and the empire's reconstruction. According to Islamic texts, she endeavored to unify the empire and alleviate the populace of onerous taxation. Her perceptions of the past and reverence for her father are evident as she restored her coinage type to that of her father. She also created ceremonial gold coins intended for limited distribution, which proclaimed her as the restorer of her lineage, specifically the divine race, a theme emphasized during the early Sasanian period. The inscription on her coin states, Buran, restorer of the race of gods. The assumption of a woman's throne in the Sasanian Empire merits examination. She was likely ascended to the throne as the sole legitimate heir, alongside her sister, capable of ruling since Kavad II had executed all her brothers. Buran also endeavored to maintain amicable relations with the Romans and dispatched the Catholicos Mar Ishoyab to Heraclius, allowing her to reorganize the empire. Buran was overthrown by another Sasanian general, illustrating the ascendancy of military leaders amid the destabilized institution of kingship, rival nobles, and Zoroastrian clergy. After her reign, Queen Azamigdux governed for a short duration. Her coinage displayed a bust of a man, perhaps a reutilization of older coins owing to her little time to produce new ones. Between 630 CE, the year of Buran's death, and 632 CE, when Yazgerd III ascended the throne, other contender kings occupied the position, only to be displaced or contested by other distant relatives of the Sasanian dynasty. This period can be characterized by factionalism and discord within the empire. We possess a compilation of monarchs who minted coins, and others recognized solely via literary references. However, this period presents complexities regarding succession, and only a provisional sequence of rulers can be provided. The subsequent list includes Joshnasbanda, Azar-Migdukst, Hormizd V, Khusro III, Peroz II, and Khusro IV. The late Sasanian Empire increasingly resembled the Parthian feudal structure before the Arsacids' collapse. This arrangement rendered local officials and deans the most formidable elite, while monarchs and governors could not maintain authority. According to numismatic evidence, Hormizd V Khusro III, Perez II, and Khusro IV concurrently governed various regions of the empire from late 631 CE until 637 CE, by which time Yazdgerd III had already been reigning for some years. During this period, authority was concentrated in the capital of Ctesiphon, where the king was crowned while the deposed kings traversed the provinces. The Deans, likely the most populous group, collaborated with local Zoroastrian priests to govern the various regions of the empire. The crowning of Yazdgerd III at the Anha-Hed fire temple in Istakhr in 632 CE is foreboding, as it was the historical center of power for the Sasanian dynasty. This may represent a symbolic gesture and an indication of the region's allegiance to the Sasanian dynasty, thereby instilling a sense of security in Yazdgerd within Fars. His reign, however, coincided with the Arab-Muslim incursion into the Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean. Yazdgerd III, the roaming monarch of the Iranians. Yazdgerd III was compelled to traverse many provinces, soliciting allegiance, financial contributions, and assistance. Under this monarch's reign, Persia resembled the medieval Germanic style of governance, characterized by a nomadic kingdom. The Arabs entered Iraq in 633 CE but suffered defeat at the Battle of the Bridge in 634 CE. In 636 CE, after the Battle of Qadisiyah, the Sasanians, led by Rustam, were vanquished, resulting in the unopposed capture of the capital, Ctesiphon, by the Arab Muslims, while the aristocracy and courtiers retreated to the interior of Persia. Under Caliph Umar's leadership, Khuzestan was conquered in 642 CE, and Media was captured during the Battle of En-Uha-Vand in the same year. This exposed the core of Persia to conquest with minimal opposition. It is important to note that during the reforms of Kavad I and Khusro I, the military was segmented into 4 divisions, each assigned to a frontier region. Consequently, the defeat of a single army revealed the empire's vulnerabilities. The internal conflict among groups likely undermined the cohesion and strength of the standing army. The Arab-Muslim triumph was attributable to several factors. Moreover, the formidable Sasanian cavalry was inferior to the agile Arab light cavalry, which exhibited superior maneuverability. The Islamic texts typically indicate that the number of Persian warriors ranged from hundreds to tens of thousands, significantly exceeding the size of the Arab army. This is a work of pure fiction, characterized by arrogant prose that seeks to exalt Arab-Muslim accomplishments, akin to the Greek narratives of the Greco-Persian Wars. The Sasanian army could not have assembled a substantial force against the Arabs, as many had perished or were absent due to prolonged conflicts with the Roman Empire and internal discord. Yazdgerd III retreated to Persis. Nevertheless, the Arabs conquered that territory by 650 CE, compelling him to escape to the east. He confronted uncooperative local officials, ultimately succumbing to a coalition of the Margrave of Merv and the Hephthalite, sovereign of Ba-Ji. Tradition holds that he was slain in 651 CE in Merv by a miller who failed to accept Yazdgerd as the king of kings. The sons of Yazdgerd III sought refuge in the east, petitioning the Tang emperor, Gaozong, for assistance in their conflict with the Arab Muslims. Perez, the eldest son of Yazdgerd III, founded a realm known as the Persian Area Command in Sistan, located at Zarang between 658 and 663 CE. In 192, the Chinese acknowledged him as the rightful king of Persia. However, by 674-675 CE, it was reported that he traveled to the Chinese capital, likely due to additional Arab-Muslim conquests. He passed away in 679 CE, and his son Narseh was subsequently installed as the exiled ruler of Persia. Perez is commemorated by a stone statue at the entrance of Gaozong's mausoleum, inscribed with Perez, King of Persia, Grand General of the Right Courageous Guard, and Commander-in-Chief of Persia. The Sasan family preserved their royal status, ascended to the rank of military generals, and constructed temples at Tunhuang, Sha Chou, Wu Wei, Liang Chou, Chang'an, established in 631 CE, and Luoyang. They resided with other Persians who had arrived for commercial purposes or escaped the Arab Muslim takeover. Wahram, the other son of Yazdgerd III, endeavored to reclaim the areas lost to the Arab Muslims. Despite his eventual failure and demise in 710 CE, 196, the Middle Persian literature, particularly a little song titled Abar Madan o Wahram o Warzawand, on the coming of the miraculous Wahram, may contain a kernel of truth concerning his military efforts. Khusro, son of Wahram, referred to as Juluo in Chinese records, attempted to invade Persia with Turkish assistance but failed to overcome the Arabs. This marks the final instance of a member of the Sasanian Dynasty attempting to seize the Persian throne. The Arab Muslim invaders encountered significant opposition from certain Degaans and Zoroastrian priests within the empire, while others consented to pay a poll tax, retain control over their territories, and submit to the Arab administrators. A segment of the Sasanian military allied with the Arab armies retained their status and perpetuated the conquest of the region and Central Asia. The conquest facilitated greater cohesion among Asian cultures, allowing Arabs, Persians, Indians, and Chinese to reconnect via the Silk Road with diminished conflict. Following Wahram's demise, the Persians needed merely 40 years to overthrow the Arab authorities in Damascus. And by the 9th century, they would have found their own autonomous dynasties in Persia. Muslim sovereigns, Persian, Arab, or Turkish, recalled the Sasanians and asserted lineage from Sasan. The Sasan family was never overlooked. The Iran Shahar society. A persistent characteristic of Iranian history is the interdependent interaction between the sedentary populace and the nomadic tribes. Our sources exclusively reveal this relationship when nomadic tribes either support or undermine the imperial rule, owing to a scarcity of evidence. Various methodologies exist for examining Persian society in late antiquity, with the conventional perspective focusing on the social stratifications instituted by the Sasanian government through the ancient religious customs of the Avestan era. The foundation of Iran Shah enabled the Sasanians to impose Avestan rules and their class system upon the society of the Iranian plateau. The contemporary civilization possessed distinct Achaemenid and Parthian traits, unlike antiquity. For our purposes, it is essential to examine the society of Iran Shah through the lens of the Sasanian worldview, characterized by the class system. One must consider the nomadic traditions when examining the urban history of Sasanian Iran. In his esteemed work, Ik Persiani, Alessandro Bausani delineates the principal characteristics of the connection between urban and nomadic populations in Islamic Iran, with certain principles applicable to Sasanian Iran. Structure of society, nomadism versus urbanism. The Sasanian Empire sought to establish itself as an urban empire. Many individuals undoubtedly established residences in the ancient and contemporary cities that were components of the Sasanians' urbanization strategy. By the conclusion of the Sasanian era, Mesopotamia exhibited the highest population density in the pre-modern epoch. This was not an accident. Instead, it was an element of an urbanization initiative, specifically a road and dam construction project of the Sasanian Empire in its core region. The formation of cities is the principal characteristic of the Sasanian state-building initiative, which had political, social, and economic implications for late antique Persian society. Middle Persian writings, such as the Shahristan Iran Sahar, the provincial capitals of Iranshar, illustrate the determination with which the Sasanian rulers founded and refounded cities bearing their names. Ardashir I is recognized for founding numerous cities, the most significant being Ardashir Shwara in Persis. Shabur I founded even more, with Iran Shwar Ra Shabur being the most prominent. The deliberate incorporation of the term Iran into city names was predicated on Avestan concepts, which associated the ancient myth and epos of Persia in the 3rd century CE. The inclusion of Iran Swara in city names signifies the resurgence of the Avestan concept of glory of the Aryans, reflecting Sasanian ideological convictions. Numerous cities were inhabited by Romans, Goths, and individuals of various religious affiliations, including Christians, and likely pagans from the Fertile Crescent, as well as other prisoners taken during conflicts with Rome. The deportations led to an infusion of a non-Persian demographic into the empire. Many of these captives were proficient artisans, including engineers, who were employed in constructing royal towns and infrastructure, including bridges and dams. At the same time, the Persian populace grew familiar with Roman technology. The expulsion and resettlement had a significant economic impact, which will be addressed in the economic chapter. Shabur I initiated military campaigns in the west, primarily to acquire plunder and tributes from the Romans, strengthened Sasanian influence in the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and the Fertile Crescent, and import skilled laborers to inhabit newly constructed or restored cities within the empire. This particularly applies to the creation of royal cities and associated workshops, which foreign laborers inhabited. This decision also had an additional implication, ultimately resulting in an inflow of Christians and the proliferation of Christianity throughout the empire. In contrast to the established population, there is scant evidence regarding the nomadic tribes that resided on the Iranian plateau. The most notable group of nomads is called Middle Persian Kurds. Although the term may have represented the nomadic Kurdish populace in Middle Persian literature, it was also applied to nomads more broadly, who likely had a tenuous relationship with the urban-centric Sasanians. Ibn Balkhi's report indicates that their collaboration with the Sasanian troops implies their eventual exploitation by the state. The Dalamite and Gilani tribes, more commonly recognized, were also involved in military service during the Sasanian and Islamic eras. The Kamani, another notable group, is believed to have been a nomadic tribe residing in the Persis province, as Istakri reported. The Kurds and the Kamanis are referenced in Middle Persian texts as components of an army, supporting their involvement in the Sasanian and early Islamic military. The landed gentry, Daegans, played a significant role between the urban people and the nomads, with their significance emerging from the 6th century CE onward due to the reforms instituted by Kavad the Firm and Khusro Shah, Han Shah, the sovereign of sovereigns and the system of reality. The Sasanian Empire was led by the King of Kings. His well-being and health were consistently invoked in prayer, and the phrase, "May you be immortal," responded to him. The Sasanian coins from the 6th century depict the sun and moon in the 4 quadrants, indicating that the king was positioned at the center of the universe, with the celestial bodies revolving around him. He was the sovereign of the 4 corners of the earth, an ancient Mesopotamian concept. All other kings were his subordinates since Roman, Turkic and Chinese rulers occupied 3 minor thrones at the court. The magnificent court and throne room are extensively described in Sasanian texts. The king's attire was vibrant. He applied cosmetics, and his beard was embellished with gold, while a crown of considerable weight was suspended from the ceiling. When one had the opportunity to approach the king, they beheld the King of Kings concealed behind a curtain, obscured from the gaze of the ordinary individual. The Roman and Chinese civilizations similarly exemplify the notion of distance between the sovereign and the populace. These sovereigns were likely aware of one another's court protocols and endeavored to emulate and surpass one another. Upon approaching the Persian ruler, one performed a prostration, referred to as proskinesis in the Eastern Roman context and kowtow in Chinese culture. He exclusively spoke with the keeper of the curtain, who conveyed the king's directives. This represented the private aspect of the Persian monarchy. He, nonetheless, granted audiences to the populace on 2 significant occasions, Novruz and Mihragan. As de Jong posited, these 2 festivals united the various social classes, or at least their leaders, and consolidated society under the king's authority. The exchange of presents underscored and symbolically preserved the cohesion between the institution of kingship and the various social classes. Significantly, these 2 festivals occurred precisely 6 months apart, allowing for a consistent and regular connection throughout the year. Early Sasanian monarchs were regarded as divine, as indicated in their regal inscriptions. They were referred to as divine, signifying majesty, with their ancestry linked to the deities. Consequently, the king was not average, warranting reverence and exuding an aura of sanctity. The monarchs increasingly underscored their sacred obligations as Zoroastrian theology and imperial propaganda advanced. Just as Ormazd created order from disorder and contended with cosmic chaos, the king fought against chaos to restore order on earth. The king's administration of justice ensured the populace's welfare through stability. This title is closely linked to the renowned Sasanian monarch Khusro I, who reigned in the 6th century CE. The king's inequitable actions may precipitate societal turmoil. If society descended into chaos, it was the king's responsibility to restore order. Our sources strongly supported a structured class hierarchy. To comprehend the social history of Persia, we must examine the city and urban social systems of the urban-oriented Sasanians. In this context, the Sasanians effectively managed and expanded their socio-political structures. It is crucial to acknowledge that the precise timing and extent of class divide and hierarchies at their most stringent remain uncertain, as detailed material on this topic is solely derived from religious literature in Middle Persian dating from the 8th and 9th centuries. These poems may imply an optimal social structure and embody Sasanian ambitions. By the conclusion of the 3rd century CE, this rigidity may have started to manifest. Multiple sources indicate that the state acknowledged and the religious apparatus promoted 4 estates or classes. The priests constituted a class that was further stratified by rank and function. The chief priests, priests responsible for the fires, expert theologians, judges, and erudite priests were selected from the religious hierarchy. Examining writings such as the Herbadestan reveals many priestly titles, underscoring their significance and expertise in religious practices. They operated in diverse roles within the state machinery and the court. The judges originated from this estate because they knew the theological subjects that influenced imperial rules and standards. They also served as counselors, andarzbed, and according to the epigraphic evidence, we are aware of counselor priests who held significant positions. Additional significant priestly positions encompassed the priest of Ormazd Mobed. It is essential to recognize that these titles were not established simultaneously or at the Sasanian dynasty's inception. Instead, ranks and titles were expanded as the state's administrative and ecclesiastical structures developed. By the 5th century CE, each priestly class had a designated chief, with evidence for two: the chief of the Mobeds, referred to as Mobedan Mobed, and the teacher priests overseeing the fires known as Herbedan Herbed. Seminaries educated priests through the instruction of religious texts, the memorization of prayers, and the discourse of theological issues under supervision. The religious institutions encompassed the Maostans and Herbedestans. Some texts reference a title that seems to denote the greatest rank among the priests, may be translatable as Zoroaster-like. The location of the Zardashtum's dwelling is ambiguous. However, if we adhere to the Middle Persian sources, it is evident that he was required to remain within the empire and not to wander outside its borders. The phrase encompassing the entire religious body was denbaran, which focused on study and culture, frahang. The execution of proper ceremonial rituals led to the triumph of warriors over adversaries and improved agricultural practices, resulting in enhanced land cultivation and the welfare of the populace. Consequently, both their counsel and deeds ensured the welfare of society. The Middle Persian text delineates the roles of the priest and the activities in which they should abstain. These encompass the standard expectations of a priest across all religions: to uphold the faith, venerate the deities, render judgments in religious and ritual affairs based on historical texts, guide individuals towards righteousness, illuminate the path to salvation, and instill the fear of damnation. Not all priests were employed inside the state apparatus or affiliated with the Zoroastrian state church. Some were condemned or regarded as heretical. The priests operated not only within the ecclesiastical and legal frameworks, but also in the economic domain. They were responsible for supervising the state's tax collection, as indicated by their signatures in the form of signet rings on bullae or the ostraca evidence. In one instance, the religious courts held jurisdiction over a priest's condemnation for deceit or falsehood. The Herbs also served as instructors of religious hymns and rituals for the populace, with their religious focal point likely being the fire temple. A Middle Persian text provides a compilation of the segments of the Avesta that the Herbedan may have committed to memory, specifically the Yasht, Hadoxt, Balan, and the Wudodad. They must also comprehend the meaning or translation, namely, the Zond. Christian martyrologies from the 6th century further confirm the memorization and recitation of sacred hymns. Many edifices called Chahar Tak were likely these centers, fire temples, that the Zoroastrian community visited often. Individuals sought fire temples not just for prayer or to hear the herbed, but also to alleviate hunger and thirst. Significant disparities existed in priestly roles and perspectives by the late Sasanian period, akin to those in medieval European Christianity. This indicates that the Mobedan and other priestly factions resided in luxury and affluence, actively participating in the administrative framework, as seen by their signet rings. In contrast, others had a modest existence, laboring on the land. The 6th book of the Denkard contains a significant excerpt wherein two priests cultivate the land, draw water from a well, and recite their religious mantras. A high-ranking priest observes their actions, finds them commendable, and subsequently bestows upon them thousands of silver coins, drums. along with a symbol of nobility. They, however, only accept 2 drams and return the remainder, asserting that they will only take what is necessary. Despite its ideological essence, this narrative illustrates an ascetic existence using Christian terms. It may have attained significance for a cohort of priests, referred to in our text as herbids, depicting a markedly distinct representation of Sasanian Zoroastrianism. The principal fire temple in the empire was associated with the priestly estate of Adur-Farabe and served as their ceremonial hub. The warriors constituted the second estate of society, tasked with safeguarding the empire and its populace. The armies were originally led by an Iran-spawned general of the empire. Subsequently, during the reign of Kavad and his son Khusro I, this position was dissolved, and 4 generals were designated to oversee the empire's 4 quarters. At that time, another office, the Generalissimo, had attained the paramount position in the Sasanian military. The army incorporated and secured the backing of the local monarchs, royal princes, nobility, and the gentry. The paramount segment of the nobility, the warriors, safeguarded the empire, accorded respect to individuals, and upheld their oaths. By the late Sasanian Empire, the recruitment of nomadic mercenary armies undermined the status of the higher classes within the military. The military was divided into cavalry and infantry. Like clergy attending seminaries, soldiers received training in established military sciences and fighting manuals, which remain evident in the Denkard relics. The collaboration between the priests and the warriors was essential, as the priests conceived the notion of Iran Shah, a designated province governed by the warrior nobility throughout the Sasanian era. This relationship facilitated the state's survival during the inception of the Sasanian Empire and became integral to the idealistic Zoroastrian principle that religion and state are inextricable. It was believed that one could not exist without the other. The protracted conflict resulted in the empire's ultimate disintegration and deterioration as both factions endeavored to assert their dominance over one another. The military was called Shpa and subdivided into other divisions. The cavalry constituted the paramount segment of the army, typically comprising the Wuzurgan and the Azadan, along with individuals exhibiting extraordinary prowess in warfare. Ammianus Marcellinus depicts the Persian cavalry in the 4th century CE. The Persian cavalry donned body armor and helmets featuring just eye openings. Their horses were similarly adorned with armor. The grotto of Khusro II at Taki Bustan epitomizes the pinnacle of Sasanian armor development while echoing the account of Ammianus Marcellinus. Their armaments, as delineated by al-Tabari regarding the reforms instituted by Khusro, comprised horse mail, a soldier's mail coat, a breastplate, leg armor plates, a sword, a lance, a shield, a mace, and at his waist a girdle, a battle axe or club, a bow case housing 2 bows with strings, 30 arrows, and 2 braided cords. By the 6th century, the Chancery of Warriors established a consistent stipend for cavalry. The elite unit known as the Immortals was selected from this group of soldiers, and its leader was likely the commander of the royal guard. A light cavalry comprised of mercenaries and tribal individuals throughout the empire included the Delamites, Gilanis, Georgians, Armenians, Turks, Arabs, Kushans, Khazars, and Hephthalites who instilled fear in the Romans. The alternative cavalry utilized in warfare was the elephant corps. These creatures may be regarded as the armored vehicles of antiquity, and the Persians' nearness to India guaranteed a consistent provision of them. Ammianus Marcellinus depicts the elephants as possessing a grotesque appearance and ferocious gaping maws. They were hardly tolerable to the timid and resembled mobile towers. According to Tabara, elephants were utilized as early as the 3rd century CE during the reign of Shapur the First, who employed war elephants to destroy the city of Hatra. In the 5th century CE, Pyrrhus deployed 50 elephants in his battle against the Hephthalites. A relief at Taku Bustan illustrates the elephant corps under the reign of Khusro II, and Islamic records indicate its utilization against the Arabs in the 7th century. The infantry was led by the commander of the infantry. The archers positioned themselves behind the infantry in the battle line, armed with shields and lances. Maurice's Strategicon provides comprehensive insights into weaponry strategies, complexities, and distinctions, and its application among Persian and Roman soldiers. The cavalry and infantry units necessitated a substantial logistical framework, supported by conscripts from the populace to supply food, maintain weapons, care for the injured, and set up encampments, among other tasks. The Sasanians employed Roman expertise in deploying siege apparatus, such as scorpions, ballistae, battering rams, mobile towers, catapults, and moles. The Sasanian naval warrants mentioned played a crucial role from the outset of Ardashir III's conquest of the Arab territories along the Persian Gulf. The dominance of the Persian Gulf was essential for military and commercial reasons, ensuring protection against piracy, Roman expansion, and the management of Arab tribes. According to Al-Tabara, the Persian vessels accommodated 100 men, 8 dispatched to Yemen during Khusro I's reign in the 6th century. Another early Islamic account confirms that Khusro I dispatched 100 men on each of the 8 ships, indicating that the Persian naval vessels accommodated up to 100 men. The compelling aspect of the narrative is that he imprisoned the men. Consequently, it likely was not a highly effective maritime force. According to the narrative, 6 ships reached the shores of Aden safely under the leadership of Wahriz. Wahriz would have assumed command of the fleet. The additional titles and classifications we possess originate from later sources indicating various military positions, including commander of the forts, warden of marches, the hereditary title of the general of Tus in the east, and army general. The warrior estate included a specific fire temple, Adur Gushnasp, which ranked just below Adur Farobe. The fire temple was located at Shiz near Ganzak in the southeastern vicinity of Lake Urmia, where the monarch and his warriors congregated for adoration. Following his victory over the Turks, Wahram Gur V dispatched a jewelry collection to the fire temple for display. It is important to note that Ardashir III offered comparable contributions to the fire temple of Anahid at Istakhr in the 3rd century CE. His sacrifices consisted of the heads of the rebels, indicating that although the Zoroastrian priests controlled the Anahid fire temple, Adur Gushnas may have assumed a particular cultic role. The third estate comprised the husbandmen and farmers who cultivated the land and sustained the empire's prosperity. They were represented by a chief agrarian. They served as producers of foodstuffs and constituted the revenue basis for the empire. Hence, the government surveyed the cultivated land and taxes were levied upon it. In the Zoroastrian religion, cultivating the soil is considered virtuous, while leaving it fallow is considered a transgression. The role of the farmers was to engage in agriculture and promote cultivation while striving to enhance ease and prosperity. Adur Burzanmir served as the third principal fire temple in the empire, where husbandmen congregated at specific ceremonial events. The fourth estate was significantly more populous than the other three, and was regarded relatively distinctly under Zoroastrian law. The artisans exhibited a discernible tension with the priests, as inferred from our Middle Persian writing structure and distinctive language. The Dagestana Menog Ugshrad discusses the functions of the initial three estates. This chapter discusses the priests, warriors, and farmers, whilst another section addresses the artisans. The terminology and extent utilized in delineating this estate's purpose reflect the Zoroastrians' unfavorable perspective on the artisan class. Request equitable compensation, for if an individual lacks proficiency in a task and undertakes it, he may either compromise it or leave it incomplete. And if the individual is content, it would constitute a transgression for him. This passage is more pessimistic than the preceding one, which discusses the initial three estates. This illustrates that artisans and merchants occupied the lowest tier of the social structure when Zoroastrian priests first documented social regulations. The negative perception of artisans and the merchant class is particularly significant given the substantial population of artisans and merchants in Persia throughout late antiquity. This unfavorable perspective partially led to a decline in Zoroastrian participation in these activities and prompted religious minorities to gravitate toward craftsmanship and trade. The government was not interested in creating economic markets or engaging in commerce. Instead, private enterprises were to be the primary advocates of trade. The government was solely responsible for maintaining the highways and collecting toll taxes, the one who made the most contribution to the thriving economy. The Sogdian merchants, residing in the northeastern region of the Sasanian Persian Empire, were not exclusively Zoroastrian and were receptive to diverse theological ideologies. The establishment of Persian colonies in the Far East for commerce, particularly in silk, highlights the prominence of Christian Persians. The Christians would have exploited this anti-Zoroastrian position on artisanship and commerce to their benefit, addressing societal needs and increasing their numbers through patronage. Christians exhibited a more favorable attitude towards business and artisanship than Zoroastrians, which may have facilitated the expansion of Christianity following the Islamic conquest of the Near East. The Manichaean hearers were artisans and traders, whereas the Manichaean elect, akin to Zoroastrian priests, abstained from commercial activities. This is particularly intriguing considering the elect relied on the hearers for their fundamental necessities. The business-friendly characteristics of Islam facilitated its swift dissemination across the Iranian plateau. In the 7th century, Sogdian merchants, Manichaean craftspeople, and Zoroastrian entrepreneurs regarded Islam as a pro-commerce faith and endorsed this sector. The Prophet Muhammad, a trader by profession, resided in Mecca, a significant commercial hub, and was acutely cognizant of the merchant class's societal role. A similar rationale may be used for the decline of Buddhism in eastern Persia, including Afghanistan, where economic factors compelled a shift towards Islam. There exists an irony in this scenario, wherein the state recognized the artisan and merchant class as a substantial source of income, affluent and influential, yet continued to prioritize agriculture, the prevailing mode of production, relegating artisans and merchants to the lowest echelons of society. The theological underpinnings of Persian society contributed to the aversion towards the emergence and acceptance of the artisan and merchant class as a prominent group. Consequently, it was logical for artists and merchants to embrace Manichaeism and Christianity, followed by Islam initially. The state regulated the royal workshops to maintain the quality of commodities, including silver dishes utilized as propaganda tools and the production of glass and other goods for the nobility. Skilled Roman, Gothic, and Mesopotamian workers employed Roman methodologies in their artistic production. The royal workshops meticulously observed the cities in which these foreign immigrants settled. A guildmaster oversaw production and the workforce. The lack of a fourth principal fire temple for this artisan merchant estate indicates their inferior position and/or the presence of non-Zoroastrian individuals within the estate. All four estates were supervised by a peshag salar, who, according to legal documents, served as the chief of the estates. This broadly categorizes society based on Middle Persian and Islamic texts. However, we can also analyze society via two distinct groups: the affluent and the impoverished, or the aristocracy and the populace. This separation allows for distinctions among court life, the lives of others, and individuals with low incomes, including enslaved persons and the underclass. Zoroastrian law, applicable to society, dictated that a woman's rights and advantages were contingent upon her birth class. The metrics constituted a significant segment of society, particularly when many were forcibly relocated to the empire during the king's western campaigns to repopulate and introduce new skilled laborers. This group, primarily consisting of Romans, Goths, and the Christian populace of Syria, was utilized as agricultural laborers and enslaved individuals, contingent upon their abilities. Buran and the transition of power. Buran was overthrown by another Sasanian general, illustrating the ascendancy of military leaders amid the destabilized institution of kingship, rival nobles, and Zoroastrian clergy. After her reign, Queen Azarmigdukht governed for a short duration. Her coinage displayed a bust of a man, perhaps a reutilization of older coins owing to her little time to produce new ones. Between 630 CE, the year of Buran's death, and 632 CE, when Yazdgerd III ascended the throne, other contender kings occupied the position, only to be displaced or contested by other distant relatives of the Sasanian dynasty. This period can be characterized by factionalism and discord within the empire. We possess a compilation of monarchs who minted coins and others recognized solely via literary references. However, this period presents complexities regarding succession, and only a provisional sequence of rulers can be provided. The subsequent list includes Yoshnaspanda, Azarmigdukht, Hormizd I, Khusro III, Peros II, and Khusro IV. The late Sasanian Empire increasingly resembled the Parthian feudal structure before the Arsacids' collapse. This arrangement rendered local officials and deans the most formidable elite, while monarchs and governors could not maintain authority. According to numismatic evidence, Hormizd V, Khusro III, Peros II, and Khusro IV concurrently governed various regions of the empire from late 631 CE until 637 CE, by which time Yazdgerd III had already been reigning for some years. During this period, authority was concentrated in the capital of Ctesiphon, where the king was crowned while the deposed kings traversed the provinces. The deans, likely the most populous group, collaborated with local Zoroastrian priests to govern the various regions of the empire. The crowning of Yazdgerd III at the Anahid Fire Temple in Istakhar in 632 CE is foreboding, as it was the historical center of power for the Sasanian dynasty. This may represent a symbolic gesture and an indication of the region's allegiance to the Sasanian dynasty, thereby instilling a sense of security in Yazdgerd within Fars. His reign, however, coincided with the Arab-Muslim incursion into the Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean. Yazdgerd III, the roaming monarch of the Iranians. Yazdgerd III was compelled to traverse many provinces, soliciting allegiance, financial contributions, and assistance. Under this monarch's reign, Persia resembled the medieval Germanic style of governance, characterized by a nomadic kingdom. The Arabs entered Iraq in 633 CE but suffered defeat at the Battle of the Bridge in 634 CE. In 636 CE, after the Battle of Qadisiyah, the Sasanians, led by Rustam, were vanquished, resulting in the unopposed capture of the capital, Ctesiphon, by the Arab Muslims, while the aristocracy and courtiers retreated to the interior of Persia. Under Caliph Umar's leadership, Khuzestan was conquered in 642 CE, and Media was captured during the Battle of Nihavand in the same year. This exposed the core of Persia to conquest with minimal opposition. It is important to note that during the reforms of Kavad and Khusro I, the military was segmented into 4 divisions, each assigned to a frontier region. Consequently, the defeat of a single army revealed the empire's vulnerabilities. The internal conflict among groups likely undermined the cohesion and strength of the standing army. The Arab-Muslim triumph was attributable to several factors. Moreover, the formidable Sasanian cavalry was inferior to the agile Arab light cavalry, which exhibited superior maneuverability. The Islamic texts typically indicate that the number of Persian warriors ranged from hundreds to tens of thousands, significantly exceeding the size of the Arab army. This is a work of pure fiction, characterized by arrogant prose that seeks to exalt Arab-Muslim accomplishments, akin to the Greek narratives of the Greco-Persian wars. The Sasanian army could not have assembled a substantial force against the Arabs, as many had perished or were absent due to prolonged conflicts with the Roman Empire and internal discord. Yazdgerd III retreated to Persis. Nevertheless, the Arabs conquered that territory by 650 CE, compelling him to escape to the east. He confronted uncooperative local officials, ultimately succumbing to a coalition of the Margrave of Merv and the Hephthalite sovereign of Baghdis. Tradition holds that he was slain in 651 CE in Merv by a miller who failed to accept Yazdgerd as the king of kings. The sons of Yazdgerd III sought refuge in the east, petitioning the Tang emperor, Gaozong, for assistance in their conflict with the Arab Muslims. Peroz, the eldest son of Yazdgerd III, founded a realm known as the Persian Area Command in Sistan, located at Zarang, between 658 and 663 CE. In 192, the Chinese acknowledged him as the rightful king of Persia. However, by 674 to 675 CE, it was reported that he traveled to the Chinese capital, likely due to additional Arab-Muslim conquests. He passed away in 679 CE, and his son Narseh was subsequently installed as the exiled ruler of Persia. Peroz is commemorated by a stone statue at the entrance of Gaozong's mausoleum, inscribed with Peroz, King of Persia, Grand General of the Right Courageous Guard, and Commander-in-Chief of Persia. The Sasan family preserved their royal status, ascended to the rank of military generals, and constructed temples at Tun Huai, Chou, Shi, Chaco, Wu Wei, Liang Chu, Chang An, established in 631 CE, and Loyang. They resided with other Persians who had arrived for commercial purposes or escaped the Arab-Muslim takeover. Wahram, the other son of Yazdgerd III, endeavored to reclaim the areas lost to the Arab Muslims. Despite his eventual failure and demise in 710 CE, the Middle Persian literature, particularly a little song titled Abar Madan Wahram Warzawand, on the coming of the miraculous Wahram, may contain a kernel of truth concerning his military efforts. Khusro, son of Wahram, referred to as Juluo in Chinese records, attempted to invade Persia with Turkish assistance but failed to overcome the Arabs. This marks the final instance of a member of the Sasanian dynasty attempting to seize the Persian throne. The Arab-Muslim invaders encountered significant opposition from certain deans and Zoroastrian priests within the empire. while others consented to pay a poll tax, retain control over their territories, and submit to the Arab administrators. A segment of the Sasanian military allied with the Arab armies retained their status and perpetuated the conquest of the region and Central Asia. The conquest facilitated greater cohesion among Asian cultures, allowing Arabs, Persians, Indians, and Chinese to reconnect via the Silk Road with diminished conflict. Following Bahram's demise, the Persians needed merely 40 years to overthrow the Arab authorities in Damascus, and by the 9th century, they would have found their own autonomous dynasties in Persia. Muslim sovereigns, Persian, Arab, or Turkish, were called the Sasanians, an asserted lineage from Sasan. The Sasan family was never overlooked. Scribes. The scribes' role and significance escalated as the Sasanian administration's bureaucratic structure expanded. They executed multiple functions and required diverse talents. Certain scribes served the Sasanian army, while the local province monarchs employed others. The royal scribes were tasked with commissioning the composition of imperial inscriptions, subsequently translated into Greek, Arabic, Sanskrit, and other languages. Certain scribes needed bilingualism to translate and compose in many languages, perhaps from Rome, Arabia, and other areas. The scribes have provided seals indicating their status and the areas they administered, ranging from scribes to the top scribes. In educational institutions, scribes were anticipated to acquire proficiency in many handwriting styles, including calligraphy, shorthand, intricate knowledge, and dexterous fingers. They appeared to possess knowledge of many writing systems, including the sacred script, an Avestan script developed during the Sasanian period, and the comprehensive script whose function and characteristics remain ambiguous. Islamic literature documents its application in physiognomy, divination, and several unusual practices. The third kind, turned or cursive script, was employed to inscribe contracts and various legal documents and applications in medicine and philosophy. The fourth style, known as a secret script, was employed for purposes such as monarchs, composing confidential correspondence with one another. The sixth was the script for letters, and the seventh was the standard script. The scribes were tasked with composing letters and correspondence, and we have a copy of a manual detailing the appropriate writing styles for various purposes and situations. Consequently, a specific formula was established for each category of correspondence directed towards the grandees or lords, initially to inquire about their well-being and happiness, followed by guidelines for commencing and concluding the letters. This systematic approach to letter writing is further evidenced by 7th century papyri originating from the Persian occupation of Egypt. The correspondence often commences with reverence and salutations directed towards the recipient and/or the date of composition. Some of these scribes encompassed the accountants who employed distinct scripts for their specific tasks, such as treasury accounting or managing religious foundations. Royal tax collectors dispatched to the empire's provinces used unique accounting scripts, and legal scribes documented judicial rulings using their specialized script. Legal documents and contracts adhered to established legal terminology and were authenticated with wax and a seal. Copies of these documents were preserved in various archives. Additionally, they were required to record the minutes of tribunals of inquiry. These scribes presumably sprang from the clergy and specialized in Zoroastrian jurisprudence. Royal decrees, treaties, divorce certificates, manumission certificates, title deeds for the transfer of property, ordeal warrants, and ordeal documents constituted various types of contracts and documents. Concerning the Holy Scripture, the scribes of the Scripture used the sacred script to replicate texts recorded during the Sasanian era. Like other professions, the chief scribe had the title master. The scribes held significant roles in the court and continued to serve the caliphate upon the arrival of the Arabs. Numerous local monarchs from the Sasanian lineage maintained their entourage, comprising a counselor, a priest, a scribe, knights or nobles, messengers, and chiefs. The final group consisted of further subdivisions, including masters of the house or clan leaders and the landed gentry, who gained prominence by the late 5th or early 6th century due to the reforms of Kavad of Far and Khusro firms. The Mazdakite revolt allowed Kavad to diminish the upper nobility's influence while simultaneously empowering the lower nobility, the landed gentry. By the 6th century CE, the landed nobility, or gentry, was the foundation of the state, which became reliant on these minor landholders. The landed gentry attained prominence at the nobles' expense, levying taxes on peasants and participating in military service. This likely led to localism, wherein local landowners prioritized their interests over those of the Sasanian state. When the Arab Muslims commenced their conquest of the region, these landowners were prepared to pay a poll tax to maintain their authority and operate similarly under the new rulers. The landed gentry are recognized as the transmitters of Persian ethics, morals, and social norms encapsulated in the epics and romances of medieval Islamic Persia. The epic writings indicate a preference for heroic narratives and a distinct sense of class, contrasting with urban dwellers who likely recounted tales of kings and heroes in manners that emphasize different aspects of their interests. The inhabitants of the empire. The populace of the empire, referred to as flocks or masses, formed the predominant segment of society. Non-Zoroastrians, including Jews and Christians, likely possessed their residences. It is acknowledged that Gay, located near Isfahan, was a Jewish city. This city, located on the western bank of the Zayande Rud during the Islamic period, was referred to as Al-Yahudiya, meaning the Jewish town, and was larger than the eastern portion of the river. In Susa, a significant population of Jews resided near the notable tomb of the prophet Daniel. Following the acknowledgement of the Persian Christian Church, Nestorian, and its separation from the Byzantine Church, the circumstances for Christians significantly improved. The formation of a diocese and the presence of seals indicate their significance and the regions with the highest Christian population. In Persia, Christians governed dioceses throughout 6 areas. The tolerance exhibited may explain the popularity of this proselytizing religion, particularly among the nobles, including royal women like Shirin and Gulendukst, whose martyrdom accounts were plentiful during this era. The Christian populace of the empire comprised 2 factions: the Persian Christians, likely more influential in Sasanian matters and responsible for establishing the Nestorian Church, and the second faction, consisting of Roman war captives and individuals seized in Syria and subsequently deported to the Sasanian Empire. The architectural remnants in the city of Bishapur, along with the roads and bridges reflecting Western aesthetics and technology, indicate their involvement in construction activities, with their engineers contributing to infrastructure development. By the late 6th century, the Sasanian aristocracy had embraced Christianity, and the proliferation of hagiographies and martyrologies indicates that Christians had infiltrated the heart of Zoroastrian society. The evidence indicating that Yazdgerd III and his son Peroz commissioned the construction of Christian churches in China implies a shift towards conversion within the royal family. Non-Zoroastrian women, mainly Jews and Christians, did marry Zoroastrians, especially the nobility and the king of kings. For instance, Wahram-Vei's mother was Jewish, but Khusro II's favored bride, the mother of Queen Buran, was Christian. This may have enhanced the safety of their particular communities, as these women would articulate their worries. By the 5th century CE, the state acknowledged the significance of religious minorities and endeavored to integrate them into a governance framework wherein, according to legal principles, all would be regarded as citizens of the empire. Local religious customs governed each community, subjecting them to the authority of their rabbi and/or priest. The state court held precedence in cases involving individuals from disparate religious communities. While Zoroastrian law served as the foundation of state law, the imperial system established a mechanism to incorporate all citizens of the empire. This framework enabled the designation of an individual as Iranian and the Iranian community as Iranians. Conversely, Jews and Christians embraced the concept of Iran, Shah, having integrated into it, whereas the Manichaeans, who faced persecution, did not. Consequently, the notion of Iran transcended its Zoroastrian origins and, due to the Sasanians, persisted even after the decline of the Sasanians and the cessation of Zoroastrianism as the state religion. The second significant segment of society comprised the impoverished, the oppressed, and the masses. W. Shaki proposes differentiating between the destitute and wretched poor, characterized by their insolence and dissatisfaction with their circumstances. The deserving poor, referred to in medieval and modern contexts as darwis, are typically lauded in Zoroastrian literature and comprised both women and men who, according to the texts, were content with their possessions and lived at a basic subsistence level. Those who neglected to aid them encountered damnation in hell and perpetual suffering. Shaki believed that the destitute poor constituted a knowledgeable clergy, suggesting they were likely the forerunners of the dervishes in the Islamic era. The wretched poor were as prevalent as in other late antique communities. They may have contributed significantly to societal tensions, resulting in their unfavorable portrayal in Zoroastrian Middle Persian texts. The rhetoric employed in the literature portraying the destitute indicates that they were not only discontented with their challenging situations, but also scorned the Sasanian state, regarding the affluent with disdain. The majority were common thieves and criminals who perpetrated theft, disrupting the urban populace's safety and the empire's distant trade. If captured, they were branded and hence marked as deviants from Ormazdian culture. As the deserving poor formed a collective, the wretched poor must have similarly organized to assist themselves and their relatives. A discontent or disdain for one's circumstances may readily compel an individual to pilfer from the affluent. These individuals may have originated from the Fourth Estate, those laborers or unemployed who toiled diligently and were despised by the clergy and the government. Adurbad-i-Mahr Spandon identifies the rebellion of the wretched poor against the lords as one of the 5 principal tragedies that might afflict humanity. This introduces another faction within Sasanian society, the Marda Juwan, referred to in the Islamic era as the Jawan Mardan, or the Menabund, who epitomized the disaffected youth. The Islamic sources provide more favorable insights into these dissatisfied youths whom the Sasanian Empire regarded as a rabble. They adhered to their code of conduct and were not inclined to plunder anyone, but instead focused on assisting the impoverished and oppressed. Middle Persian sources briefly reference them, and from the limited excerpts available, it is understood that their transgression involved appropriating from one faction, the affluent, and redistributing to another, the impoverished. Notably, they deemed it commendable to steal from the affluent and bestow upon the deserving impoverished. They can be likened to the social factions referred to as the Ayarun during the Islamic era, which, with some degree of imagination, share certain resemblances with the blue and green circus factions of the Eastern Roman Empire. The accounts of Mazdakite activity resemble this group's actions, as the adherents of this sect in the early 6th century sought to redistribute the wealth of the affluent among the impoverished. This originated from their religious conviction that Ormazd had bestowed worldly possessions for equitable distribution, although some transgressed by appropriating the riches and property of others. Consequently, these individuals adhered to a theological framework distinct from state Zoroastrianism. The Zoroastrian faith possessed an institution that supported the impoverished and marginalized. Individuals established this institution to benefit the deceased souls. The Sasanian legal system classified an individual's assets into 3 categories, allocating 1/3 to protect the soul. Infrastructure, financial resources, and food for individuals in poverty were allocated under the supervision of appointed individuals by the founder of the charity foundation for themselves or their family members. This institution alleviated hardships and tensions not addressed in the extant Middle Persian texts. The establishment of the late office of the protector of the poor and judge was also a response to the social and economic challenges during the reign of Ctesiphon. The societal discord contradicted the utopian portrayal of Zoroastrian society, where each individual had a designated role and order was of utmost significance. Consequently, the law and the state penalized these individuals and those who contravened the rules. For example, offenders regarded as citizens of the empire were stigmatized. They may also have been subjected to flogging, amputation, or incarceration. Penalties and regulations. The state employed punishment as a mechanism for societal control. The Sasanian Empire employed corporal punishment methods such as flogging, amputation, and branding. For instance, failure to appear in court at the appointed time for theft, or a husband neglecting to provide sustenance for his wife during her menstruation while committing theft, resulted in the punishment of branding. If individuals were branded 4 times for different offenses, they would face life imprisonment. Another form of punishment and humiliation involved the convicted individual being mounted on an animal, typically a donkey, and paraded through the streets. The initial mention of this is located in the Parthian epic, the Ayadgar Zareran, where after the battle the Iranians apprehend their adversary's leader, Arjasp. One of his hands, legs, and ears has been severed, and one of his eyes is scorched. They placed him on a disabled donkey and conveyed him to his native town. This passage implies that this was an archaic form of punishment. Notably, the Achaemenid king of kings, Darius I, punished Phraortes by severing his nose, ears, and tongue and blinding him in one eye, illustrating this tradition. Furthermore, such punishment re-emerged during Narses' bid for power in the 4th century CE. The Paikuli inscription states that Narses apprehended his opponent Wanam, presented him before himself, restrained him, and positioned him on a mutilated donkey. Handling nature and animals reflects a set of mandates on purity and pollution. Deforestation, waterway pollution, and environmental degradation were deemed immoral. Despite the flood of foreigners settling in the empire, these injunctions served as a deterrent to ecological distress and rendered epidemics less prevalent than in the Eastern Roman Empire. The prefixation on purity and defilement undoubtedly created difficulties for the populace. As water represented the deity Khordad, its contamination constituted a significant transgression, which the Zoroastrian clergy devised clever methods to circumvent, particularly for washing or bathing. In urban areas, the bathhouse was adjacent to the fire temple and the venue for seasonal celebrations. Sasanian Zoroastrianism. Through Ardashir and the family of Sasan, Zoroastrianism was made the empire's official religion. This religion had devotees in Persis before the Sasanian period, where the Achaemenids had ruled and worshipped Ahura Mazda. From the 2nd century BCE to the end of the 2nd century CE, coins from Persis demonstrate that Ormazd, Ahura Mazda, was worshipped and honored. The reverse side of these coins shows the king and sometimes two people raising their hands in reverence towards a structure resembling the Kabe Zardosht at Naksh-i-Rustam. Above the structure hovers Ormazd in his Achaemenid anthropomorphized form. Ardashir continued a religious tradition in Persis since the Achaemenid period. By all accounts, Ardashir's family had a priestly function associated with the Zoroastrian cult of Anahid and its fire temple in the city of Istakhr. Their knowledge of the Zoroastrian tradition equipped them to attain political control over the region and eventually the Iranian plateau. This could be likened to later Sufi warriors in North Africa or the Safavid family in Persia, who began as religious leaders before becoming political and military leaders. Although Ardashir's family was of priestly origin, its relationship with the kings of Persis remains uncertain. Ardashir erased any doubts about his religious conviction in one of his investiture reliefs, declaring himself the Mazda-worshipping majesty, Ardashir, king of kings of Iran, who is from the lineage of the gods, the son of the majesty, King Pabag. His coins carried similar titles, suggesting Ardashir minted coins bearing these titles even before defeating Ardawan IV. The idea that rulers were from the race of gods had persisted since Alexander the Great's invasion, and is reflected in the kings of Persis coins. The codification of Zoroastrian religious knowledge was a significant process under Ardashir. According to the Middle Persian text Denkard, Ardashir demanded that scattered teachings be brought to the court, where Tosar selected the trustworthy ones and excluded the rest from the canon. This indicates that Ardashir and his family were familiar with the cult of Anahid, but not the broader Mazdian tradition, requiring Tosar's expertise to systematize the doctrine of Zoroastrianism. This centralization of religious doctrine and canonization can be compared to the formation of the New Testament in Christianity. Both processes involved deeming certain texts and authorities unreliable and creating a standardized religious canon. However, Ardashir's religious reforms were not universally accepted. As indicated in the letter of Tansar, there were accusations of heresy and innovation from other Zoroastrian factions. Ardashir defended these innovations as necessary for unity, a stance supported by claims of supernatural predictions regarding his arrival. The Sasanian version of Zoroastrianism, which was proclaimed as orthodoxy, may have deviated from earlier traditions. This new tradition was adopted and enforced by the Sasanian state and clergy, though true unity in belief was likely never achieved. Early Sasanian rulers, including Shapur Thurfer, established fire temples and dedicated sacrificial resources, creating a temple economy. The system included servants, enslaved people, and guardians to sustain these religious centers, paralleling ancient Near Eastern temple traditions. The Sasanians' focus on Anahid was not exclusive. Other cultic activities centered on deities like Mithra, highlighting the diversity within Zoroastrianism. This pluralistic religious landscape, influenced by Greek and Mesopotamian traditions, faced consolidation under Ormazd's worship, although remnants of these practices persisted. Mani, the prophet of light. During Shapur-Vafern's rule, Mani, a prophet born in Babylonia, emerged. Shapur allowed Mani to propagate his dualistic religious system, which used Zoroastrian terminology to communicate its message. Mani's teachings, based on two opposing principles of spirit and matter, contrasted sharply with Zoroastrianism. While Zoroastrianism celebrated the material world's beauty as Ur-Mazd's creation, Manichaeism viewed the material as evil and the spiritual as good. Mani's doctrine incorporated elements from Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Gnosticism. He presented himself as the seal of the prophets who completed their teachings. His religious texts, including the Shaburagan, were translated into multiple languages, emphasizing his universalist approach. Despite initial support from Shapur IV and later rulers, Mani faced opposition from the Zoroastrian priesthood, particularly Kerdir under Wahram I. Mani's downfall occurred after he was accused of heresy and arrested during a visit to Jundishapur. According to Manichaean sources, Wahram I scorned Mani, mocking his lack of practical contributions to society. Imprisoned, Mani ultimately died, but his religion found refuge in Central Asia, appealing to Turkic tribes and the Chinese. Although Manichaeism flourished briefly in the West, Christianity's rise stifled its growth. Mani's syncretic use of local religious concepts helped his ideas gain traction, but the Zoroastrian clergy and state eventually suppressed his movement. His teachings testify to the religious diversity and tension during the Sasanian period. Kerdir, the forgotten priest. Kerdir's rise from the rank of a Zoroastrian teacher-priest to an all-powerful chief priest, assuming other titles along the way, is essential for understanding early Sasanian Zoroastrianism. Kerdir left his biography in several places in the province of Persis, alongside the Sasanian royal inscriptions and rock reliefs. His eventual power and influence in the second half of the 3rd century are evident in that he is the only non-royal figure allowed to have his biography inscribed on stone, a privilege usually reserved for royalty. Kerdir's biography reveals two primary strands of information: his political aspirations, the establishment of a unified religious doctrine, the process of his empowerment, and how he justified his religious convictions over others in the empire. In his inscriptions, Kerdir misleadingly implies that he was active from Ardashir I and held significant power. He claims that he surveyed the empire under Shapur I, established fire temples, provided monetary support to priests, and taught them the correct rites and rituals. He had charters signed for the fire temples with his insignia, Kerdir the priest, lending these temples greater authority, particularly those aligned with what would later be recognized as Sasanian Zoroastrianism. Kerdir likely played a role in establishing religious seminaries where priests were trained in doctrinal matters. These seminaries became centers for discussing and debating issues related to rites and rituals, ensuring unity in religious practices and enabling the identification of recognized priests while labeling others as heretics. However, this focus on doctrinal uniformity may have marginalized popular religious practices, which likely exhibited an eclectic mix of traditions. Under Hormizd I, Kerdir received new titles and honors, including the cap and belt signifying rank among the upper class, and he was elevated to chief priest. He also received the title Kerdir, whose soul Wahram saved, highlighting his growing stature. By the reign of Wahram I, Kerdir's influence increased further. He became a magnate, the judge over the entire empire, and the custodian of the Anahid fire temple at Istakhar. This transfer of custodianship signaled a shift in the relationship between the Sasanian kings and the fire temples, with religious authority gaining prominence over royal control in cultic matters. Kerdir also claimed to have suppressed heresies and aligned various Mazdean thinkers with the official state religion. He referred to seminaries and the process of consolidating religious doctrines, including the unification of rites and rituals. The term task, which he mentioned, refers to sections of the Avesta, indicating efforts to systematize and preserve Zoroastrian texts during the 3rd century CE. Kurdir's inscription documents the persecution of various religious groups, including Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, Nazarenes, Christians, Mandaeans, and Manichaeans. Idol worship was also condemned, likely targeting the veneration practices of Christians and Buddhists. With its universal aspirations and allegiance to the Roman Empire, Christianity was particularly concerned for the Sasanians after Constantine adopted the faith. Christians' proselytizing efforts and converting noble families to Christianity further strained relations with the Zoroastrian hierarchy. Christian persecution intensified during Sasanian conflicts with Rome, but decreased after the Persian Christian Church was officially recognized, with its Catholicos based in Ctesiphon from the 5th century CE. In contrast, Jews enjoyed relatively better treatment under the Sasanians. Middle Persian texts and non-Sasanian sources document close relations between Sasanian monarchs and Jewish leaders. Notably, Yazdgir I married a Jewish woman, Shishendocht, and their son, Wahram V, was seen as a legitimate ruler by Zoroastrians and a Jewish king by the Jewish community. The Jews were also vital in transmitting knowledge about the Achaemenid dynasty to the Sasanians. The Bible's references to the Achaemenids and translations of the text into Middle Persian likely influenced Sasanian understanding of their predecessors. The story of Esther, depicted in the synagogue at Dura Europos, is a notable example. Middle Persian graffiti on these frescoes, dated to the 3rd century CE, further reflects Sasanian engagement with Jewish traditions. Kurdir's inscriptions also detail his religious mission and vision of heaven, hell, and purgatory. However, scholars suggest that the vision was experienced by a young boy rather than Kurdir, achieved through rituals involving staring into a mirror while reciting mantras. This method, borrowed from Mediterranean traditions, highlights the susceptibility of early Zoroastrian rituals to foreign influence. In contrast, traditional Zoroastrian visions often involved consuming sacred drinks, such as the hemp or henbane potion taken by the righteous Wiraz, or the water given to Zoroaster by Ormazd, which granted all-knowing wisdom. These methods reflect Central Asian influences and a long-standing tradition among Zoroastrian priests. Kurdir's visionary experiences reinforced his moral authority, which he wielded against heretics and religious rivals like Mani. Under Wahram Thefsh, Kurdir's influence was instrumental in Mani's arrest and subsequent death. Kurdir's power likely waned during Nasir's reign, as the new king emphasized the cult of Anahid, from which the Sasanians originally drew their power. Nasir's inscriptions at Paikuli and Nakshi Rustam highlight his dedication to Anahid, contrasting with Kurdir's dominance over the religious sphere during earlier reigns. Kurdir's rise from the rank of a Zoroastrian teacher-priest to an all-powerful chief priest and assuming other titles is important for understanding early Sasanian Zoroastrianism. Kurdir has left us his biography in several places in the province of Persis, along with the Sasanian royal inscriptions and rock reliefs. His eventual power and influence in the second half of the 3rd century is apparent in that he is the only non-royal personage in the 3rd century who was given permission to write his own biography on stone, characteristic of Persian royalty. In his biography, we may find two different strands of information. One has to do with his political aspiration and establishing a unified religious doctrine. Second, We can ascertain the process of this empowerment and how Kurdir justified his religious conviction over other subjects of the empire. In his biography, he misleads us into thinking he was active from the time of Ardashir I and that he held much power. Kurdir tells us that under Shabu'ar I he surveyed the empire and established fire temples, and that the priests were given monetary and perhaps more power to become content and taught the correct rites and rituals. He had charters signed for the fire temples with his insignia, Kurdir, the priest, making them more authoritative. His title suggests that he was a simple priest at the time, or that there was no religious hierarchy. But this would change. He must have also taken it upon himself to establish religious seminaries where the priests would be trained adequately in matters of religion. This system would ensure unity in doctrinal matters and the identification of recognized priests, since others could now be labeled heretics. These seminaries were the religious schools where most of the issues regarding doctrine and ritual were discussed. It was in the seminaries where differences arose and debates took place. By focusing on this imperial religion and its seminaries, two problems arise. Kurdir and the Middle Persian texts portray a unified Zoroastrian doctrine, which most Zoroastrians followed at the time. Second, by focusing on these matters, popular religion is neglected, and what must have been an eclectic tendency on the part of the populace and the Zoroastrian intellectuals is pushed aside. It is under Hormizd that Kurdir received new titles and honors. As he states, he received the rank markings for the upper class, i.e. cap and belt, and he received the title of chief priest. Kurdir also received a new title, which for a long time was misunderstood, D. But now, thanks to P.H. Heiss, we can read the title as Kurdir, whose soul the god Wahram saved, the Maubed of King Hormizd. When we come to the reign of Wahram I, we begin to see changes in Kurdir's status. In describing his feats under the first three kings in his inscriptions, Kurdir describes his work formulaically, where there is little difference except the new titles he assumes. When Kurdir describes the time of Wahram I, it is evident that this king bestowed more honor on him. This is clear from what Wahram I allowed Kurdir to receive, first becoming a magnate or assuming their rank, and second becoming the judge over the whole empire, which suggests that from then on the judges were drawn from the ranks of the priests. Third, Kurdir is given the custodianship of the Anahid fire temple at Istakhr. One cannot help but feel that something changed in the relationship of the Sasanian kings vis-à-vis the fire temple or their religious functions once tied to these important cultic centers. This power base of the rulers was given up to a priest, so a divergence took place in the king's function and the importance and rise of the professional religious organization and hierarchy in the late 3rd century CE. There may have been religious doctrinal differences between Zoroastrian schools of thought, if such schools existed, since Kurdir states that he put down heresies and tried to put all the different Mazdian thinkers in line with the official state religion. Them I punished, and I tormented them until I made them better. Another important but more ambiguous term that Kurdir deals with is Moestan, which has been translated differently. I see the concept of religious seminaries for the priests whose chief was Kurdir. This confirms Denkard's statement that under Shabu'ar the Avesta was collected and the different schools of thought about religion were brought forth and examined, so there would be no disputation as to the authoritative text, which also suggests unified rites, rituals, and doctrine. He also mentions another important term, nask, which is of interest. Nask refers to each of the sections of the Avesta, which the Zoroastrian tradition considers to have consisted of 21 tasks. Nasks were books or a collection of texts, suggesting that the Avesta may have been written in one form or another in the 3rd century CE. The persecution of the other religious groups also becomes evident from the inscription, KKZ 9-10, in which Kurdir states that Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, Nazarenes, Christians, Mandans, and Manichaeans were harmed. The next line indicates that idols existed in the empire or that idol worship existed, which is probably related to Christians and Buddhists' veneration of the image of their respective leaders, teachers. The Persian term idol is derived from Buddha, which gives credence to the fact that Kurdir persecuted the Buddhists. Christians were to be the subject of persecution for several reasons. First, Christianity before the Christianization of the Eastern Roman Empire tended to have a universal outlook, much like Manichaeism, and always held to universal aspirations. But with Constantine's adoption of Christianity in the Roman Empire, Persian Christian loyalties were divided between the King of Kings, who was not Christian, and the Emperor Constantine, who proclaimed himself to be the leader of all Christians in the oikumene. The problem with the issue of Christian loyalty to the King of Kings is also clear in that Shabuhar II, in the 4th century, had asked for a double tax from the Christians for his war campaign. According to the Acts of Simeon, once the Christian leader refused to abide by this request, it is said that Shabuhar had said, "Simeon wants to make his followers and his people rebel against my kingdom and convert them into servants of Caesar, their co-religionist." Second, Christianity was a proselytizing religion that conflicted with the Zoroastrian hierarchy. After all, who were the Christians in Persia trying to convert? We have many cases in which even people from noble families converted to Christianity and were martyred for their beliefs. For the Zoroastrians, this would not have gone over well with Kurdir and other priests. The persecution of the Christians from this time took place when the Sasanians fought the Romans, especially in the 4th century CE. This persecution would decrease because the Persian Christian Church became officially recognized and its Catholicos was stationed at Ctesiphon in the 5th century CE. Jews appear to have been treated much better by the Sasanians. Reading through the non-religious Middle Persian texts written during the Sasanian period, one can see the close relations between the Sasanian monarchs and the Jewish population, especially with the community's leaders. For example, in the provincial capitals of Iran, a Sasanian king is said to be from the marriage between the Sasanian king and a Jewish woman. The city of Khorizm was built by Narseh, the son of the Jewess, or the city of Shush, Susa, and Shushtar were built by Shishindokht, the wife of Yazdgerd, the son of Shabur, since she was the daughter of Resh Galut, the king of the Jews, and also the mother of Waram-Gur, another Sasanian king. Middle Persian Resh Galut is the Aramaic form of Resh Galutha, leader of the exile. Post-Kurdir, Zoroastrianism. We should also say something about the nature of official doctrinal Zoroastrianism upheld in the Sasanian period. The Middle Persian sources, which are the product of priestly tradition, lead us to believe that the path to the Zoroastrian religion was one, and that the priests tied to the state were its representatives. That this religion was connected to the state and that they were deemed inseparable is mentioned in a famous passage in the Denkard. Know that kingship is religion, and religion is kingship. For them, kingship is arranged based on religion, and religion is based on kingship. Even if we do not have much information about the Zoroastrian sects, the Zurvanite and monotheistic forms of Zoroastrianism were present. For some time, It has been suggested that Zurvanism was the dominant mode of thought among certain Zoroastrian priests and kings during the Sasanian period. For the early Sasanian period, it was not the Sasanians who told us about this orientation. Rather, it was inferred from the Manichaean sources. In relating his doctrine in Middle Persian and Parthian, Mani does not use Ormazd as the supreme deity, but rather Zurvan, who he mentions as the highest god. Based on this evidence, it is thought that the early Sasanian kings, and even Kurdir, may have been followers of Zurvan, although this is speculation based on the Manichaean sources. Kurdir could have been anti-Zurvanite, and thus saw Mani as further endangering Zoroastrianism. It is again during the middle of the Sasanian period, during the rule of Wahram Fev and Yazdgerd II, that we hear through the famous prime minister that Zurvanism was in vogue. He had named one of his sons Zurvandad, created by Zurvan. Also, such Armenian sources as Elisha and Esnik of Kolb inform us of Mihr Narse and his efforts to force Zoroastrianism upon the Armenians where the Zurvanite form was being propagated. Certainly traces of Zurvanistic thought are apparent in some of the Pahlavi texts, such as the Menog-i Xrad, although there was a campaign to cleanse it by the scribes who wrote down the tradition in the early Islamic period. Zurvan was the god of eternal time, who had existed from time immemorial. The priests with Zurvanite leanings believed that the evil spirit, Ahriman, came to the world due to Zurvan's doubt, followed by Ohormazd. Thus, in this system, Ohormazd and Ahriman became brothers, or twins. This idea may have originated in a passage from the Gathas of Zoroaster, Yasna 33, where there is a reference to the two spirits being born and opposed to one another in thoughts and deeds. The interpretation may have been false because, in the Gathas, the opposition is between Spenta Mainyu and Angra Mainyu, not Ohormazd and Ahriman. In the original Zoroastrian doctrine of the Gathas, Ormazd, in this opposition and dualism, is above and beyond the two spirits, but the former is the arm with which Ormazd creates and propagates his ideas. However, the Zoroastrian priests of the Sasanian period had elevated Ahriman to such an extent that he was now equated with Ormazd. More will be said of the Zoroastrian priests' infatuation with evil Ahriman and the campaign to cleanse the world of it with a host of purity laws. These ideas made a deep impression on the people, who also turned to non-Zoroastrian religions for aid. Since no reference is made to Zurvan in the Sasanian sources, and since Ormazd is the deity that is venerated in the inscriptions, we should not give too much weight to the Zurvanite hypothesis. As a distinct school of this may be an infatuation of modern scholars with Zurvan, rather than a reflection of its importance in the Sasanian period. As Shakht has mentioned, that this creation myth projected onto the Sasanian state religion probably never existed as a distinct doctrine of Zoroastrianism in this period. Armenian and classical sources inform us that the Persian kings worshipped the sun and the moon, and Roman sources state that Shabuhar II claimed to be the brother of the sun and the moon. But this does not appear in the Sasanian sources themselves. There are two possibilities. One is that this may be a reference to the deity Mithra. A more interesting answer is that it may be an Indo-Iranian trait in which it was believed that their ancestors were descended from Manu-Cher, Indik Manu, and his father Vivavant, Indik Vivasvant, who were identified in India with the moon and the sun, respectively. Otherwise, the dualistic form of Zoroastrianism, in which Ormazd and Ahriman were at the battle, and where humans must choose between the two, was the dominant form of Zoroastrianism. Now, in the intellectual circles there may have been differences, and this may have been due to foreign influences, since the Denkard states that during the time of Shabuhar I, non-religious writings were collected and added to the Avesta. Shabur, the king of kings, son of Ardashir, further collected the non-religious writings on medicine, astronomy, movement, time, space, substance, accident, becoming, decay, transformation, logic, and other crafts and skills which were dispersed throughout India, Rome, and other lands, and collated them with the Avesta, and commanded that a copy be made of all those writings which were flawless and be deposited in the royal treasury. He also proposed annexing all those pure teachings of the Mazdian religion for deliberation. This passage is important because it tells us that the king ordered ideas drawn from Greek and Indian sciences and incorporated them into the Avesta. Thus, the Sasanian Avesta was a melange of ideas and learning from the world that seemed useful, or by the Zoroastrianism in which Shabur believed or was creating. Thus, he proved his point by going through an ordeal which, according to the Zoroastrian tradition, proved one's truthfulness or lying. This reminds us of the ordeals that people of ancient Mesopotamia went through to prove their innocence or guilt, such as being thrown into the river. However, molten metal was poured on one's chest, and survival was proof of truthfulness. The molten metal ordeal invokes Gathic imagery of the end of time, when the righteous walk on molten metal as if walking on warm milk while the sinners burn. This is only one of the 6 ordeals by heat used in ancient Persia. In another Middle Persian text, What is Licit and Illicit, the story is related to Adurbad-e-Marspandan pouring molten metal on his chest, but since he was sincere, it felt like milk had been poured. But those who were followers of the lie would burn and be killed. There was also the placing of hot iron on the tongue and other ordeals which were to prove one's innocence, which basically meant a person was guilty until they were dead from the ordeal or lived through it. Still, another way in which the Persians proved the truthfulness of their statement was by the ritual drinking of sulfur, which was thought to be connected with the Persian to take an oath. But this connection has been disproved by Monsieur Schwartz. Mazdak, the heretic par excellence. Thus, the problem of heresy in the eye of the Sasanian Church was serious enough to have had one priest using a foreign tradition of a vision of heaven and hell, and another pour molten metal on his chest to combat heretics, make others believe in their ways, and codify the Avestan tasks. Of course, for the Zoroastrian priests tied to the state, the arch-heretic was no other person than Mazdak, who appeared in the late 5th, early 6th century CE. Regarding Mazdak, we must discuss another issue, the interpretation of the Avesta. Even when the Avesta was codified and written down, most of it was unintelligible to the priests, so commentaries were written to make it understandable. There is no reason to doubt that there were various interpretations of the Avesta. Consequently, those who made unacceptable interpretations of the holy text were labeled heretics. Some commentaries probably had a Gnostic interpretation of the Avesta, which may have seemed repugnant to the courtly priests, as Mani and his doctrine had been. This foreign influence on certain Avestan interpretations caused the religious body to slander those of mixed doctrine, which was leveled at a certain heretic named Sen and Mazdak. The doctrine of these heretics was assumed to be in opposition to those who espoused the good religion. By all accounts, Mazdak's social message was the creation of an egalitarian system of the distribution of wealth at a time of famine, which must have created further social tensions. Zoroastrian Middle Persian sources, of course, see Mazdak as the heretic par excellence who commanded that women, children, and property be shared among the population, which resulted in social chaos. The Middle Persian sources inform us that sons did not know who their fathers were, and so they could not determine their class affiliation. P. Crone has suggested that Mazdak generalized the institution of levirate marriage, in which a man without male issue can give his wife in levirate marriage to another man. This means that the Mazdakites would have made such arrangements possible between classes as well, and forced such an issue with the backing of Kavad. What seems novel here is that Mazdak was probably going against the time-honored dictum, "Take a wife from your own relatives," i.e., the institution of next-of-kin marriage. The lower classes must have favored this priest's proclamations and ideas, which he claimed were based on the interpretation of the Avesta. In fact, Mazdak's ideas were not totally foreign. Only the nobility and priests attached to the state disliked his interpretation of the Avesta. According to Middle Persian and other sources, Mazdak's ideas were influenced by Zardosht from Fasa, whose followers followed the right religion. He was probably living in the 5th century CE and was a predecessor of Mazdak, who now reformulated and furthered his ideas. The Mazdakites, who followed the teachings of this Zardosht and then Mazdak, are said to have preached righteous deeds, abstained from sin, and practiced sacerdotal functions. What they lacked, however, was that they were less bent on following rites and rituals, and the most important sentence about them in the Denkard declares their primal sin. Regarding the Mazdan religion, they think that by interpreting the religion, they seek to remedy it. This means that their interpretation remedied the social and economic hardships of the period after the Hephthalite onslaught, famine, and social tensions. The Mazdakites believed in matrilineal descent, recognizing descent from the mother, which was contrary to the Zoroastrianism the Sasanians had established.